Out of the gates and ready to go. Monday edition is here. OutKick 360. We are certainly ready.
Let's go.
With Chad Withrow, I'm Jonathan Hutton. 6th and Peabody, our location. Yeehaw Beer, Old Smoky Moonshine. Will Cain, co-host of Fox and Friends and the Will Cain podcast. He will join us in 20 minutes. Looking forward to that conversation. Plus, Brad Crawford of 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports HQ. He will be on the show in about an hour and a half. Looking forward to catching up with Brad there, and plenty of NFL reaction, craziness throughout the weekend. A great weekend of football with fantastic finishes. So many, it's tough to really rank, and that's true because of how memorable these will be for years to come. But we start with what was a fantastic finish and a messy moment that ended the World Cup with Argentina winning the World Cup this year. And, Chad, what a scene it was.
The scene in Buenos Aires for the celebration was remarkable, and Argentina gets it done. It's the perfect ending for Lionel Messi, who immediately has been called the GOAT after winning this World Cup. But Hutton, in soccer, you know, one of my knocks on the sport, and this is the ugly American in me, is that you hear these great names of the sport, but so rarely can even the greats just single-handedly or single-footedly take over a game, right? You had that in this, though. Mbappe for France with the hat trick, 2 goals for Messi. That's what was cool, was the star power delivering star performances in a World Cup final. And the 2 guys who everyone knew, even those who aren't the biggest soccer fans, they delivered. When the brightest lights, moments. Biggest stage for the World Cup, that was really cool to watch.
Time for our 6 topics, 6 and 360. We're going to go through the top topics of the weekend, and we'll start with the World Cup and the scene that was. The craziness with the drone footage, Chad, that you sent us, and I know OutKick has this as well. The flyby overview of the crowd and the celebration is the most, I mean, it's the best celebration I think I've ever seen visually based on the way this was shot.
This is one that even the staunchest soccer hater out there, someone who doesn't like the sport, that wants to talk about every other sport, not soccer, it's tough to argue against this celebration in Buenos Aires, Argentina, after Argentina won the World Cup. It was madness. I've never seen anything on this level in the United States, any parade, anything close to matching this. It looks like it is CGI. I mean, it does not look real. It looks like something James Cameron put into the next Avatar movie, which, by the way, looks horrific, this Avatar movie. I have no idea why any of you went and saw this piece of trash. I didn't watch the original. It looked so bad to me. But either way, that looked bad. But what happened in Argentina looked terrific. And what a match it was in the World Cup final with Argentina taking home the World Cup.
The Vikings have the largest comeback in NFL history, down 33-0 at halftime against the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts defense and special teams did literally everything possible to go into the locker room with a victory at halftime. And then Matt Ryan and this offense for Indianapolis did nothing throughout this game. They needed one play. They needed one score, and they could not get it. And the Vikings outscore the Colts 36-3 in the second half and then win in overtime as time expires for the greatest comeback in NFL history. Wow. What a massive moment for Minnesota, where everyone's saying, oh, they're pretenders. Well, no. I mean, they went from being the joke and the butt of Twitter and social media on Saturday, Chad, to turning things around to being, man, maybe this was their turning moment where everyone realizes their capabilities.
Kirk Cousins threw for 460 yards and 4 touchdowns, and they went from being the joke to turning things back to the way they've been most of the season, making the Colts the joke. They're the punchline now with Jeff Saturday, with Matt Ryan. The 2 biggest collapses, 2 of the biggest choke jobs in the history of the sport. Falcons 28-3 ahead in the Super Bowl, lost. Matt Ryan, quarterback of the Falcons. Biggest regular season choke job in history. Saturday, 33-0 lead. Blown. Quarterback, Matt Ryan this time of the Colts. Hutton, that's the type of history you do not want to make if you're a quarterback.
Yes, and you know his post-game presser was about as expected, speaking of Matt Ryan, where it's like, of course we want to make a play, and just we couldn't find that one play. But I don't know how. And Jeff Saturday was post-game saying, I was telling my guys it's 33-0, but, man, this is a team that can come back. And I'm thinking, man, how do you let that happen? They had go through everything they had. Pick six. They had the punt block, fumble recovery. They did everything in that first half to put it away and send the Vikings reeling to where San Francisco would have the 2 seed today. No, it's the Vikings. And they pick up their 11th win. They're now 10-0 in one-possession games.
It was incredible, and it really just got kicked off what was an amazing weekend of NFL football. And I talked earlier in the year about how the NFL was somewhat lacking at points in the early stretch. That was not the case this weekend, and it led to Sunday where we had maybe one of the craziest all-time endings in NFL history with the Patriots making one of the most boneheaded plays I've ever seen against the Raiders.
And they went rogue.
Giving the Raiders to win.
Ramondre Stevenson and Jacoby Myers both said that was on them trying to make a play. It was not called. It was just a draw. Belichick said they didn't go for the Hail Mary based on the field position. 24-24, final play of regulation. At worst, you just go to overtime. And for whatever reason, they treated this situation, 2 players, like it was they were down up at least a point, and they needed a score, but they weren't in field goal range. We know how it ended. The Raiders picked off the lateral that was intended back to Mac Jones and returned it for a score as time expired. Raiders win, and the Patriots are likely going to miss the postseason because of this loss.
I cannot imagine being that dumb as a player. When I first heard that they were taking full blame for it, I'm thinking they're covering for their coaches who tried to do something cute at the end of the game. But then I'm thinking, okay, the coaches can't be that dumb. Maybe the players were just that dumb in the moment, or just maybe they didn't know the score. Maybe they thought they were behind.
I don't know how.
Maybe it's a case of one guy thinking they were behind, Ramondre Stevenson, pitching it back to Myers, and when Myers got it, he freaked and panicked and tried to continue the lateral move, and then ends up throwing it to Chandler Jones, who runs it back for a touchdown. And we saw the real-life Heisman Trophy move by Chandler Jones, just easily throwing Mac Jones aside and running into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown.
Well,
Crazy moment.
I've heard others say ultimately this is on Bill Belichick. But let's think about it. Does Bill Belichick really need to tell his players not to lateral on this play?
Yeah, these are professionals.
This is not high school ball here. You're going to overtime. This was crazy. And to me, it's more impactful because it happens with the Patriots and with Bill Belichick. But it's not on Belichick to have to tell a professional, especially these starters, for the season, hey, don't lateral on this final play and don't throw it to Chandler Jones, who can return it for 48 yards. Made no sense. And, I mean, they coach situational ball in the preseason. They have a practice devoted to it. Every team would. This is not one of those things you have to talk about at this point, at this stage of a football player's career.
Well, they call it a draw. It's a play they've run a lot with Stevenson. Has he ever tried to just randomly flip it back to a teammate on a draw play? That's what's so odd about this. Is that's the play that was called. If there was no discussion about pitching it back if someone's open or trying to extend the play, then why would you do anything different than you've always done, which is run the football to the open spot, run as hard and as far and as fast as you can, away from the line of scrimmage, down the field, and hold on to the football at the end of the run.
Craziest ending ever. It's up there. I don't know if it goes down with some of the more classic finishes that the nation was watching, like in the playoffs. Not many were watching this game, but we won't soon forget this one play and how things ended in the Patriots, again, on the outside looking at the playoffs today. Chad, the Florida Gators, we were curious how they would come out and play. They end up getting boat raced by Oregon State, 30-3 the final. The spread was 10 at kickoff, and the Gators completely no-showed. Have you seen the clip of the Florida pass rush where they don't even pass rush? They just, at the snap, they stand up like it's a Pro Bowl.
Yeah, not only did I see this clip, I had the misfortune of watching this football game, which was a terrible, terrible, just no-show performance by Florida. And I watched way too much of this game. This is the downside of bowl season. This was a Florida team that some of their best players got asked to leave. Others left for the draft. And there were maybe 4 or 5 guys out there that really cared, that wanted to play in this game. And outside of that, They didn't want to be in Vegas playing this bowl game against
No.
Oregon State. Oregon State gets to finish up a great season for them, 10-3, 9-3 coming into it. There was one team that was motivated to continue playing with each other. There's another team that's looking to the offseason. What motivates Billy Napier and his Florida Gators program right now is what's going to happen tomorrow on National Signing Day and what they're trying to accomplish in the transfer portal. And part of that transfer portal is getting the trash out of the Florida program. And that's what Billy Napier's trying to do. I'm not going to give him a pass for a bad season, but it is year one, and it's pretty clear that what Napier wants to do, he's got a long way to go to do it, and to do it, he's going to have to get rid of some of the guys that's on this roster, and I think Saturday night was a good example of that.
Joe Burrow threw 4 touchdown passes in the second half. The Buccaneers turned it over 4 times, and the Bengals come back down 17 points. They score 34 unanswered, down 17-3 at halftime. And ultimately, the Bengals win this game 34-17. And the win gives the Bengals the upper hand in the AFC North now. They also have an outside chance of getting the number 1 seed, believe it or not, with 3 games to play. One of the hottest teams in the NFL, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now look at the Carolina Panthers, who control their way into the postseason.
I was on Dan Dockich on Don't At Me this morning. He asked, what's the AFC team that you just don't want to see in the playoffs? His example was the Chargers and the way they're playing with Justin Herbert. So that's a good one. I said, now, if I'm allowed to take anyone that's not the number 1 seed and say, this is who I do not want to see in the playoffs, it's the Bengals right now. They are playing great. They are the defending AFC champion. It would not shock me in the least. I know right now it's Buffalo 1, Kansas City 2. Hutton, it would not shock me if we're seeing Cincinnati go to a second straight Super Bowl by the end of January.
They're built for it.
Yeah.
They're built for it. And I mean, Buffalo certainly is. Kansas City, yes, definitely. Cincinnati's right there. And I think the difference here, Chad, Cincinnati can win in so many other ways. Like, they've got a run game they can lean on. They can be down 17 and still win the game. No different than Buffalo or Kansas City. But they've also got a defense that is middle of the pack that continues to improve week to week. And they get the turnovers and ultimately shut down the Bucs on the road. It's a solid win for Cincinnati. And now, based on Baltimore's loss to Cleveland, they're controlling the North. The final thing with the 6 and 360 before we get to Will Cain. Dansby Swanson, mega contract. I looked at these numbers. Everything's a mega contract in Major League Baseball, but everyone is printing money for the bank accounts. And we had Michael McHenry on last week, Chad. He said, hey, it makes sense that Dansby would want to be in Chicago. He fits that Cubs roster and that overall franchise mentality. And, he's now the starting shortstop for the Chicago Cubs. He gets $177 million to do so.
Also offered by the Dodgers. A little surprised that if he was going to leave Atlanta, he wouldn't go to L.A. and join up with Freddie Freeman and be on a team that's going to be another World Series favorite instead of joining a rebuild in Chicago. But he's there with a nice long stretch, 7-year deal. So he gets to see, hopefully a quick rebuild for him and back in contention quickly. Great move by the Cubs. A little bummed out for my Braves. I'm a big Dansby Swanson fan.
Yeah.
He's very much a throwback type player that can do everything. He's a throwback guy. He's a guy you almost expect not to wear batting gloves when he comes to the plate because the way he plays the game. But
so do you
he's going to be a big loss for the Braves.
Is he the new Ryan Sandberg in Chicago?
I'm trying to think of who was so Ryan Sandberg was second base. Sean Dunston,
okay,
I believe, was the shortstop. He's more of a Sean Dunston. They got a great second baseman there with the Cubs also. But yeah, he does harken back to that Mark Grace, Ryan Sandberg, grit type era of Chicago Cubs baseball. A true old school guy who can do a little bit of everything, just helps his team win. I like it for the Cubs, hate it for the Braves, but they've got Vaughn Grissom waiting in the wings, who had a pretty good start to his career this year.
Not bad. Coming up, Will Cain joins us, and we'll discuss some of the topics we just hit there in 6 and 360. We'll also get some thoughts on the new look SEC in a couple of years, his thoughts on the World Cup finish, Mike Leach, and more. It's all straight ahead on OutKick 360.
Welcome into the Trey Wallace podcast on this somber week as we remember head coach Mike Leach of Mississippi State. Also get into a couple other topics, but I'm Trey Wallace. Happy to be joined by my boy Jake Crane here from Crane and Company. Every single morning you can catch them. Jake, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Trey, man, appreciate you having me. I'm doing well. Obviously, some sad news on the forefront, not only in the college football world, but the sports world in general with the passing of Mike Leach. But it's been a while since me and you've been able to get together. And even though the circumstances are rather grim, I'm always glad to see you.
No, trust me, man. The feelings are mutual, and it's just looking back on yesterday and the last couple of days with Mike Leach and everything that went down. Your first thoughts on Sunday when we all start getting news and we all start hearing about everything that's happened with Coach Leach. The first things that come to your mind when that goes down, Jake.
Well, once kind of the shock wears off a little bit to where you kind of get in a normal headspace again and are able to take kind of a 30,000 view look at it. The memories pop up, obviously, of the funny media moments and the big wins. I mean, you look at the pass to Crabtree in the game versus Texas is an iconic play, and really throughout his career, how integral he was in the air raid, going back all the way with Hal Mummy at Iowa Wesleyan, where they invented it basically and named it. It was kind of his baby, and he was part of that air raid. Spread you out, replace modified runs, replace the run game with the pass game, and pass to run. But the thing I think that I ended up getting the most from the sad news, outside of it not looking good and the shock value wearing off, as I mentioned, was that Coach Leach was something I think that we're losing more of every day in our society. He was genuinely himself.
Yes,
he had his principles. He had his ideas, and whether you like them or not, he wasn't going to change them. And in a society like we're in today, where everybody goes with the woke mob or what's in or what's not going to get them, in trouble per se, or looked at as a terrible person, it was refreshing almost. So that's what I kept coming back to. That's what we talked about on the show, is just his genuine ability to be himself. And it's sad that that's an anomaly in society today, but it is.
Isn't it crazy to have a coach like Mike Leach who was not afraid to say what was on his mind? It doesn't matter if it was post-game. It doesn't matter if it's a midweek conversation. It doesn't, I went back and watched something last night, Jake, and he was talking about student debt and how he would rather spend a month in jail than have to pay off his student debt, and how it hurts society and it hurts the kids and they can't get out of it and whatnot. But he was not the one to ever hold back on anything. And you couldn't, I don't think the ADs at Tech, at State, at Mississippi State, and I was referring to Washington State, I don't think they wanted to hold him back. He was his own type of man, and I think that's what made him special, brother.
Yeah, no, and that he's an old school football coach at heart too. If you kind of see the way he goes about things, so it's such a unique blend. You could go across the globe, and I don't think find another person that's super similar to Mike Leach and his personality. But yeah, I mean, let me ask you this: if I drove across the country when Joe Moorhead was the head coach at Mississippi State and asked high school football recruits, "Tell me the head coach at Mississippi State," a lot of them are not going to know that it's Joe Moorhead, but those same kids that wouldn't know, if I would have driven through during his tenure, would have known that Mike Leach was at Mississippi State.
Will Cain will join us momentarily. OutKick 360 rolls on across the OutKick network. Chad, the bigger stories across the NFL include the Jacksonville Jaguars. Come from behind win, dramatic finish there as well in Jacksonville, winning in overtime on a pick six, incredible interception return, and it's a 40-34 win for Jacksonville over the Dallas Cowboys, and now they control their path to the postseason because the Titans continue to lose, and here's Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence winning game by game, and they have a chance to actually win the AFC South, believe it or not.
You know, I know Brian Daboll is going to get some strong consideration for Coach of the Year and others. But if Jacksonville continues this and goes on a run and wins this division in the final week of the season, Doug Peterson needs to get a lot of votes.
He will.
For NFL Coach of the Year because he inherited a mess from Urban Meyer. He also inherited a young, talented roster that's gotten better each and every week. They're playing really good football right now, especially on offense. And Trevor Lawrence looks like the real deal we thought he was going to be coming into the league.
Coming up, we'll chat with Will Cain in just a moment. Meanwhile, the Titans are going in the opposite direction. And this is a team now that they were kind of surprised to learn that Jacksonville was a game behind them now after the results in Los Angeles to the Chargers. Chargers got a really big win as well for a wild card option. And they've had back-to-back wins now over AFC opponents with Miami and Los Angeles, Tennessee, and all of a sudden Los Angeles is in the mix where they should be. They're now playing like the team we thought we'd see.
I thought the Titans were much better in this game against the Chargers on the road than they were at home against the Jags the week before. Defense played inspired. They got one big drive late from the offense, but all of those warts we've talked about for weeks with this team still exist. Offensive line is terrible. No wide receiver threats at all for the Titans. Now they've got to beat the Texans at home, I think, to have a chance at winning the division.
Will Cain joins us, host of the Will Cain podcast, Fox and Friends, and more. Will, more memorable finish from the sports weekend. Is it the greatest comeback from the Vikings over the Colts, or do you think years from now we'll be seeing the replay of the Raiders-Patriots and how that ended? Which one do you think is actually number one?
Raiders-Patriots, without a doubt. Now, I'll put one personal caveat to this. I pay for Amazon Prime, NFL Sunday Ticket, DirecTV stream. I pay streaming services probably approaching a dozen. I mean, I don't know how many I pay for, and somehow I still don't get the NFL Network. So I can't sit here today and tell you that I saw in real time the Vikings come back, but I did watch the extended highlights on the NFL Network YouTube page. I was there live watching, I mean, not in the stadium, on television, Patriots and Raiders. But I also think that the mind-blowing nature of that play will be the one that has us talking about it for years.
So is it just a cable package thing? Do you have to have the old school cable? Because I noticed a lot of people on Twitter complaining about not being able to see NFL Network. Is this a problem for all cord cutters? Is that the issue?
Is it a DirecTV thing? Like, you know, I've cut the cord, but I do DirecTV, AT&T DirecTV as sort of my cable package where I get local news and, you know, the local broadcast games. Maybe it's a fight between DirecTV and the NFL Network, but for years, I don't know. This has been a problem for me finding that one singular network. And by the way, it's not a problem most of the time because I don't care about the game that's on the NFL Network, but this time I cared and this time I didn't get it.
Will Cain with us. Well, and to your point and emphasis on the Raiders-Patriots finish, it also factors in which team made that mistake and that decision. And in real time, I'm thinking this had to be a call. At 24-all, I don't know why it was a call, but these laterals don't happen just on a flippant move by the players. Turns out they did, and it was Belichick's players, which makes it even more impactful to me. The fact that Bill Belichick's team did this. This wasn't something that we would see across the league from a team that continues to make all these mental errors. It's not the team with the first pick of the draft, for instance.
Yeah, playing like they were losing, and the game was tied. I mean, situational football, special teams. These are all the things that are supposed to be the hallmark of a Bill Belichick team. And now I can tell you it's the first weekend of my fantasy playoffs. So I was watching that game with like every other game this weekend, divided loyalty. So I had Ramondre Stevenson, and I needed him to. So I was excited. Oh, they handed the ball to. Look how he broke it off. Look, he's got another 20-yarder. This is great. And then all of a sudden, my jaw was on the floor.
You know, also, Will, I'm watching a lot of these post-game press conferences over the weekend, and I'm hearing so many different cliches from everyone in the NFL and even some in college football after the bowl games. And I'm thinking, man, I really miss Mike Leach even more now when I hear some of these press conferences. What a guy, what a character for all of sports, not just football, that we lost with Mike Leach. He was so impactful in so many different ways. It's difficult to assess, but I think just the freedom he felt to speak his mind and do it in a way that only Mike Leach could do it, to me, is one of his lasting impacts. What did you make of Mike Leach and his great career?
Yeah, and I think that it even extends beyond sports, because I don't know that you can find that many characters just in general that exhibit that level of independence. You know, I think I've talked about this on the Will Cain podcast. It's certainly been an idea that I've been interested in, the idea of FU money. Like, when do you get to the point where you can truly be free to be independent? And I've come to the conclusion that there's no such thing as the notorious FU money. It doesn't exist. The richer that people get, the more they seem to care about keeping their riches. I thought about that a lot when it came to, for example, John Cena. You've seen John Cena sort of toe the line of the whatever's required of the Chinese Communist Party to keep the money flowing in from China. Here's what makes Leach so interesting. I don't know that he ever really achieved freedom, like where I can do whatever I want and there is no price to pay. He didn't operate in the recruiting realm the way that so many other coaches do. You know, he didn't care. He didn't really even target oftentimes the 5 stars, even the 4 stars. He made his money. He made his way on like 2 and 3 stars. And so therefore, he probably didn't have to constantly be measuring every thought, every action, every step of the way. How does this impact me on the back end, bringing in recruits? He didn't always get along with administrations. It didn't go well in the end at Texas Tech. And so the point I'm getting at is, I don't think that there was anything in Mike Leach's life that made it so he could be freer than you or me. He still had the types of restrictions and accountability that we would use as excuses to not be independent, to say what we were supposed to say, or to hold back what we're not supposed to say. He just said it all anyway, because it was truly authentically who he was. He was so authentically quirky and unpredictable, but most importantly, in my mind, independent.
Well, and for about 10 minutes, he had the Tennessee job back in late 2017. And I'm always curious about what it would have looked like with Mike Leach at a job like Tennessee, or just name a top 20 job nationally if he had that chance. But because he was so independent and free-thinking and free-spirited and said exactly what he wanted, he was probably never going to get one of those jobs. And Will, you bring up a great point about Texas Tech. He didn't apologize at Texas Tech when they tried to fire him with cause. He didn't say anything nice about the James family on his way out. He fought it. And I feel like because he fought it the entire time, he got to continue being Mike Leach. If he would have done what most coaches would have done, and okay, what do I do for PR? Do I need to put out an apology and move on and try to get the next best job? No, he sued them when they fired him. And that too is, I think, authentically Leach. Yeah,
because he's probably incapable of what you're describing.
Like
he was incapable of.
He's incapable, yeah.
I don't think he's incapable of an apology, although, you know, every tribute after his death said that once that Leach dug his heels in, he was stuck with whatever it is he had decided. But I don't know, from a distance, and I'd only interviewed him once, but from a distance, I don't think he kind of thought of himself as a man above apology, but it would strike me that he wouldn't give an apology unless he thought it was one that was deserved. And so I don't even think it was in Mike Leach's, you know, metaphorical playbook to say, all right, if I do X, that means the outcome is Y. I mean, I think he just did X. And you could ask him at any given moment, hey, what is X? And he wouldn't dodge it. I mean, we could do the silly stuff, right, about marriage or candy or whatever, and he would not laugh at your question and not say it was stupid. He had a theory on it, but I tend to think it could have been on anything. You know, did you guys read the tribute? It was in The Athletic of all the former Washington State quarterbacks together talking about what quarterback meetings were like. It was insane. 2 hours, 3-hour meetings. And they would mess with each other. The quarterbacks, you know, going like, one of them had to be somewhere. So another one would go, "Hey, coach, what do you think about the economy?" And he'd pause the tape, right? And it would loop on the one play. They said it would loop on one play for 40 minutes while he explained the intricacies of higher interest rates. I mean, whatever it may be. He accepted the invitation for X because X was all he could do, just whatever was real in that moment.
Who's the next closest coach to Mike Leach right now?
Okay, well, only because I'm sitting here on live stream with you guys that I can't sit here for 10 minutes and think about it. So I'm just going to tell you the first name that popped in my head, and it's not a coach. And this is back to my point about how exceedingly rare I think it is in coaching and sports and life in general. Like the next name that pops in my head is Barkley. Like I think Barkley is an independent, authentic human being who isn't weighing pros and cons of what he has about to say. As for a coach, I don't know. I mean, do you have a name? I mean, like,
well, that's a credit.
I think that's the point.
That's
though.
a credit to Leach,
right?
I mean,
Belichick doesn't care what you think of him, but he's definitely weighing the pros and cons of the effects of what he has to say on his own personal situation.
Here's a loose cannon you know about in the state of Texas, Will. That's a Leach guy. A name that comes to mind is Dana Holgerson, who's a bit of a wild man and will say anything. And will go live on Instagram, smoking a cigar by his pool after a game and talk about the game with fans. It feels like if Gardner Minshew got into coaching, and I saw Gardner Minshew get emotional talking about what Leach meant to him, taking a chance on him at Washington State and how he would not be where he is right now without Mike Leach. I'm thinking that's the next Mike Leach. Give Gardner Minshew a Division I coaching job, and he's probably the next Leach. But it's a credit to Leach that we can't immediately think of someone that's like him.
And here's the other thing.
You know what?
The other thing is the guy who speaks his mind in coaching is Dion, but he's not universally loved. Like he poses some threat to other fan bases, so they don't love him the way everyone loved Mike Leach.
So I'm going to say this as though I'm dismissing or have some dislike of Dion, and it's not true at all. I really like Dion, but I'm not yet convinced that what I get with Dion isn't affected. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, they're like, has he done the internal calculation of, does this seem cool or how does this play? And that, again, is part of what was so unique about Leach, down to the way he dressed, to everything, the way he combed his hair. Nothing was put through the filter of how does this play? How do I look? It was all just real. And to your point of it's so hard to find another name, by the way, a good name is Holgerson. But the reason it's probably so hard for us, yes, those people are hard to find in real life, period. But it's even harder to find those people that have somehow made their way through the filter mechanism that is big time Power 5 or even, Division I college football or any successful corporate enterprise in life. There's just too many other middle managers who would weed out that level of authenticity as, I don't know, whatever, they don't like it. And for some reason, they can't control it. So we should probably say those people exist. They just have to go found their own companies and do their own things. It's hard to fit into existing structures.
Such a great point on Dion. The one thing about Dion is, Will, I feel like, boy, there's a camera rolling an awful lot of times around him.
Yeah.
There's no mistaking how there's always, even that moment caught where he's consoling the tight end who dropped the pass in the Celebration Bowl. I'm like, this seems a little manufactured. And Mike Leach wouldn't have even allowed that. He didn't want the behind-the-scenes stuff on him. He was who he was, and he was also refreshingly old school. You're right about Dion. There's something a little too practiced and calculated about his message and what he's doing and who he is, where it's almost like they're trying to Blair Witch Project it to make it look like it's behind-the-scene found footage, and really it's all an acting job and a production.
Well, okay, but I don't want it to all be negative about Dion, because what we're doing is we're highlighting how positive or unique it was with Leach, right?
Yeah.
So the truth is, everybody is more like Dion, probably down to you and me.
For sure.
And Dion just happens to be really good at it. I think Dave Portnoy is an incredibly talented sports media figure who always has a camera around him as well. It's not to say he's not real at all times or that it's all manufactured, or that it's a negative in any way. He's really good at that. And Dion is really good at what he does. But what they're doing is different than Mike Leach. And they're both rare. I just happen to think what's more rare is the Leach example.
Will, when you think about your Texas Longhorns joining the SEC and probably a year early, this is going to happen. Are you excited? Are you anxious? Are you all of these things, thinking about the prospects of Texas in the SEC?
I'm excited and I'm sad. I'm going to give you both. Okay. So I said this, and I stand by this, that I think I put the year, I think at the time, I said within 5 years of joining the SEC that Texas would win the SEC and therefore be in a conversation at least of winning the national championship. I still believe in that, but mostly because I have a little bit of a time window built in, but I do think Texas is on the right track. I do. You can hear the hesitation in my voice because we've got the right recruiter. We've got the right offensive coordinator. I'm just not sure he's the right guy as head coach yet. I want him to be. I'm just not 100% sold just yet. So I'm excited. I'm excited to play in the SEC. On the flip side, and I expect success. So I'm excited, and I'm not worried. The whole, look, you're going to get destroyed. OU's going to get destroyed. You're going to get exposed. You're going to lose to Mississippi State. Nonsense. There'll be years where Texas is a barely above 500 team, and I promise you, SEC fans, there will be years when Texas is 10-2, 11-1. I promise you that's going to be their future in the SEC. But the sadness is this, okay? I believe both of you guys, I can't remember where you're from, but I think you're both Southern boys.
Yep.
And that, so you can appreciate this. I like regionalism. I like provincialism. Okay. I like going to Thanksgiving and having a family member that went to TCU and to Baylor and to Tech and to Texas, and we're all talking trash. I love that. Even if TCU and Baylor and Texas Tech aren't as good as LSU and Georgia and Tennessee right now. But I know we're losing something, and no one, even my friends in Texas, don't want to hear this argument, but I do know it. I know we're losing something. I loved the Southwest Conference. I love the provincialism. I love Texas. And so it makes me sad to sort of see Texas and for that matter, Texas A&M and even Oklahoma distance itself from this thing that we've had. It's like a family reunion and cousins, and then the two biggest are going, we're going to join a new family. It's better family, but we're joining a new family, and it makes me a little bit sad.
I often wonder if NIL was around when Peyton Manning was in Knoxville at Tennessee, what would his worth have been? And then I compound that and think, okay, what if Peyton had a very famous, not just dad, but two uncles also that were big-time celebrity NFL quarterbacks? Then what would the value be? And then I say, oh, that's Arch Manning right now. And he would have a high value anywhere he went. But specifically Arch Manning as the Texas Longhorns quarterback, just how valuable is that for both Texas and the individual brand of Arch as he goes to Austin?
Well, I don't know. Do you know? Because I can't put numbers around this NIL thing at all. So the rumors that I've heard about Quinn Ewers, for example, are really high, multiple millions of dollars, right? And you brought in all the name recognition stuff, and Quinn was a bigger recruit than Arch, to be honest. I mean, in terms of rivals, 24/7, all that ratings. I mean, Quinn Ewers was in line with like Andrew Luck, and Peyton for that matter, as far as can't miss. Unfortunately, right now it looks like he is missing. I hope he can turn it around. But Arch isn't quite on that level. But of course, to your point, he's got the name. So if Quinn is worth, I don't know, let's do a ballpark, right? Is Quinn making $3 million a year? I don't know. I think.
I can tell you this. At Tennessee, they've got the player that's ranked right behind Arch Manning in all the rankings. It's one or
Nico?
two, Arch and Nico. And every report that's out there says $2 million. So let's go thinking that $2 million is now the set going rate for one of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks. It's 5-star guys in the country.
So Arch would be worth double that.
Yes.
Double.
At least.
Easy double because of his last name and what that's going to mean for television exposure to the program. We'll see about, the recruiting tail on Arch. I mean, there's some tail. We've already seen it with this recruiting class. But, I have no idea where this NIL money thing is headed. So, and by the way, I actually haven't heard reports about Arch getting any big NIL deals. I mean, I do not think the Manning family made that decision based upon how much money they could make at the University of Texas. And so therefore, I've heard no reports about you. You did hear it with Quinn Ewers. You do not hear it with Arch Manning.
What do you think is going to happen with Chris Beard?
So look, I'm a nut fan like you guys are. I think, are both of you Tennessee guys? What are you guys?
I went to Tennessee. I am a Tennessee guy. Hutton is sort of indifferent.
Well,
went to MTSU.
Yeah, I root for the storyline more than I do the team. Is that awful?
But both SEC guys.
Yeah, well, no, it just makes me super sad for you. I don't even know that kind of sports. I had this conversation with a buddy of mine this weekend. I'm a big soccer fan. He goes, like a lot of Americans, I just don't get it. And then he said, I was watching America versus Netherlands, and I had an emotional vested interest in it. And all of a sudden it's like the Matrix unlocked and I got it. And I said, that's sports for me. Since I was a kid, I have to have an emotional tie. That's the worthiness of a bet for me. That is, I'll watch a random game, and I have a kid like this. I'll watch a random game and I have to pick a team to root for. I just have to have some emotional skin in the game. I'm not one of these guys who just says, I watch it for the love of the game. But, so the point is, I'm all the way in on Texas. I read every message board on multiple different pay-for sites, and it doesn't look good for Chris Beard, like maybe in a short time frame, in a week or two, which, by the way, is crushing because Texas was set up to be a national championship contender this year, and really, honestly, to probably be on like a 10-year run as a national championship contender. They had 2 more 5-stars headed in the year after that. Beard is a proven commodity. Like I think Beard is definitely 5. I don't think 5 is overstating it. Like a top 5 coach in the NCAA, and it can't be overstated how destructive this is for the universe. And look, I understand the whole. Look, I don't know anything about the crime. I only know what I've read. Right? I don't know if it's real, if it's not. I know that there was a victim that has recanted the testimony, but that often happens in these cases. So really, the only level on which I can speak about it intelligently is as a fan. And so I'm not trying to force that prism onto this serious story. It's the only one we can talk about right now. And it's totally destroying the program where I'm a fan.
Will Cain, host of the Will Cain podcast. Final thing for you, Will. I've said the Dallas Cowboys don't need to be in the Odell Beckham Jr. camp here, because I think they're going to go further in the postseason if they focus more on the run. You add Odell, I think it takes away a bit of that mindset. And this is a Cowboys team that can run on anyone in the NFL. And I think they can go further postseason-wise. They're in it now based on what happened yesterday. If they don't force Dak to pass to guys who are going to demand the football. Do you agree or disagree? And are you on board with Odell and what Jerry Jones wants to do?
So again, this is probably like such a reflection on the power of being an emotional fan. When I was at ESPN, I said this, and I was right. Odell he's not good for any team. Now, he won a Super Bowl last year with the Rams, and maybe he proved me wrong to some extent, but I'm not saying he's a locker room cancer. He's not Antonio Brown. He's not any of those things, but unnecessary drama has followed Odell almost everywhere. But now he's talking about coming to the Cowboys. And I'm like, ooh, but that talent, that's interesting. What could that be? I don't think the Cowboys need Odell. I don't. I think the Cowboys shouldn't have traded away Amari Cooper for a 5th-round draft pick. And they could use Michael Gallup really hasn't sort of fulfilled the need of being that number 2 receiver this year. I don't think T.Y. Hilton's going to be before the year is over. So they actually could use someone like Odell. But I'm probably at this point like, nah, we don't need Odell. Not this year.
How do you describe the Will Cain podcast to someone who's never listened?
Oh, I appreciate that question. So look, the Will Cain podcast is, I would say, 2/3 news and politics, 1/3 sports, and a good chunk of my personal life. I talk about me. Because that's what everybody wants to hear about, right? My life. But what I'm really telling you is I try to look, guys, since I got into this game, certainly when I was at ESPN, and I'm not saying, who the answer to the next Mike Leach is? It's Will Cain. But I have tried to say that who I would be is be authentic and be real. So I talk with the audience about the way I arrive at my opinions, which, look, if people have only ever exposed to me through the sports media critic world, they'd say, oh, who's Will? Oh, he's that racist guy that shows up on First Take and says nothing is ever racist or talks bad about black athletes, right? Or Will's a far right guy on Fox. Listen, I've thought about the reason that I think about the position that I hold on almost everything. And this podcast is an example to work through that process, talk through it. And I promise not a like heavy way, but like a cerebral, I'll tell you the deep dive, including talking about the Cowboys or soccer or the Mavericks or the Longhorns or whatever else.
So if Mike Leach co-authored a book on Geronimo, will co-author a book on what, Chad?
Odell Beckham Jr.
Yeah,
and why he's not good for a team,
No,
maybe?
no.
I think you probably go a little deeper than that. A lot of options there for that.
Will, thank you, man.
I
This has
just
been a
wish
lot of fun.
Leach would have picked Geronimo's all right.
Yeah.
You know, he should have picked like Quanah Parker, like a Comanche. That's what I wanted. I would have read about Comanches. Geronimo was all right. But look, that's what Leach was into, like pirates or whatever else. Can't take away what a man's passion, authentic passion might be.
That's right.
Will, we had the co-author who's an English professor at Washington State on the show the day that Leach passed away, and some of his stories about working with Leach and their research together and how he'd get a call from Leach at 2 a.m. sometimes asking to go through the day's work on Geronimo. Fascinating guy. And he was a fascinating guest, too, that authored this book. So I think Leach could have written about pretty much anything.
Anything that he got into, right? Anything that he got passionate about and fell down that Wikipedia rabbit hole on.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, man. Thank you for the time, and keep up the great work.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, man. We'll
Thanks,
catch up
Will.
soon. There's Will Cain. Will Cain Podcast. You can get that wherever you download your audio. Catch him on Fox and Friends as well. Coming up, Chad, who we always wanted to be. The college, well, I mean, I was on the 6-year plan. I don't know about you. Did it in 5.5, and my parents were very thankful for that. I was bummed. But there's now a guy who has been granted a 9th year of eligibility. We'll tell you why and the story behind it. That's next on OutKick 360.
Yeah, I think because things, transitioned from that regime side to that fundamentalist side. So we also had to change some of our tactics and our procedures and everything else and how we did things to cope with these guys, because they were coming up with some ingenious ways of doing things along the line as well, with some of the IEDs, some of the, the booby trapping the houses, things like that, using the cell phones to call to detonate everything. So it became, I think, as much as you say, more violent in that way, because with the regime guys too, we knew that there was the end state was trying to get Saddam, so that we needed intel as well. We needed to gather that intelligence. There was only so much that was there from previous, just historical data. Then we had to actually make it real intel and workable intel. But with the fundamentalists, if you gave them a chance to vote, and we'd say vote based off, okay, does this guy want to is he going to go along with the capture, or is he wanting to fight? And then let's see who wins. They would rather fight than do anything. There was, so many times guys would detonate suicide vests, because it's like, well, they're not going to take me, clack themselves off, thinking they're killing, other folks around them. But, they just, I don't know, they just were different folks. And it was like we had to get more violent in a way, because again, we were going after intel and doing things, and our procedures and everything on the battlefield just had to kind of adjust, just like they were doing.
That's crazy. I truly cannot imagine. And I was in college. I started college in 2010. So I was in high school when things were getting kind of real bad in the 06, 07 era. And I remember people would always talk about do we really need to be fighting these guys? Are they really that bad? And I'm like, this Zarqawi guy's literally chopping people's heads off, right? And don't think it stops there. Like, if this guy could, he'd chop all of our heads off too. Fortunately, they dropped a couple bombs on him, I believe, if I recall correctly. So now I want to get into some comparing and contrasting. What were the big differences between fighting in Iraq versus fighting in Afghanistan? Was it mostly the terrain? Was it the level of the combatant? Like, what were the big takeaways that were different from each other?
I think early on with Afghanistan was, everything was so spread out. Everything was so far in between, and we didn't have many helo assets early in the war, just because of how, basically really having to share them along with the other task force and things like that. And so there was a lot more driving, or you would get flown to an area and then you'd be there for a bit, and then, you're not getting there, you're not getting back to your home base for for a while. So you're trying to make do of it and literally just sometimes sitting around doing nothing. But then within Iraq, you had more cities, bigger cities, everything else that we were hitting. I mean, granted, you had Kandahar, you had Kabul, but everything really wasn't happening in those locations. It was farther out because, where the terrorists had their training camps from, years before us ever getting there. But then within Iraq, they could hide right there in the cities. There were, so much, just open roads, everything around. And everything else, a lot more built up areas, and it was an easier road system to get around. So it made it easier for them as well to move around. The terrain, definitely changed throughout. Iraq, you had your river valleys in a way, and you had the humidity, you had palm groves, everything else, and then you had your rocky mountain areas, dry areas. But then Afghanistan was just so severe with the mountains. I mean, that that's some treacherous terrain in itself.
Oregon's Cam McCormick granted a 9th year of eligibility. I mean, I've heard of stories of medical issues that have allowed a player to stick around longer than what's allotted there. But 9 years is something we're not going to see this for a while.
Yeah. It's,
meanwhile,
Tommy,
Tennessee waited how long to figure out if they could get a transfer in this past offseason?
Well, every year it seems like it's an annual circus in terms of something with Tennessee getting a transfer.
Here's the career of Cam McCormick.
Yeah, this is the Tommy boy of college here. Certainly going to be an MD by the time this is done,
Yes.
possibly. I don't understand the math, though. I'm looking at this today. And Davey sent this over, and I'm like, okay, redshirt freshman, that's 1 year of eligibility.
In 2016.
Season-ending injury, you could get that back if it happened early enough in a medical redshirt. Missed season in 2019, okay, that's a second possible medical redshirt. COVID year, okay, got that, right? Another season-ending. So at some point, you got to start counting the clock, too, for senior year. All of those granted, it's mind-numbing.
But he was one of the players at Oregon
that
was hospitalized after intense workouts, and then he was diagnosed with a legitimate medical issue.
Yeah,
that was from season-ending injuries from 2018 to 2021, and then also on top of that, the hospitalization.
Look, more power to him. If he wants to stay and keep playing football, I'm all for it. I'm just trying to do the COVID year thing just really threw a wrench into everything.
Yeah, because who knows?
With everyone's eligibility, because it was with COVID and with the transfer portal opening up, I don't even look at classes anymore for players because I feel like it's all year to year.
But speaking of classes, in order to do this, he has to receive academic credit for the scholarship, but he already has his bachelor's and his master's. So, like, how do you make that work? What more can you do? I'm sure there's something.
He may be Phil Knight by the time he leaves Oregon.
More headlines next on OutKick 360.
The fake punt Colts, Chuck Pagano against Bill Belichick. I think it was a Monday night or Sunday night football. The dumbest play in the history of football. The dumbest until yesterday. Now, Jacoby Myers, I'm going to set this up, ends up being the guy that screws it up royally. Stupidest play you're ever going to see. I would have cut him by the time the Chandler Jones got into the end zone. All right? Here's the call from the New England radio network, including Scott Zolak at the end. You got to hear it.
Now on a 3rd and 10, 3 seconds left. Jones will give it to Stevenson. He's starting to run. He runs it up the middle, hit by Chandler. Jones slips, the head across the 45 with a stiff arm. Off the tackle at the 40. He lost the football. And Jacoby Myers picks it up. He circles back and he throws it across the field to Jones. It's picked up by Chandler Jones. He breaks away to the 30. He runs to the 20. He runs to the 10. He runs to the end zone. Unreal. Touchdown. Raiders.
This might be one of the dumbest teams I've ever seen.
Yes.
And a victory for Las Vegas.
This might be the dumbest teams I've ever seen. That sums it up. See, here's the deal. And as a coach, you know this. The guy that does the talk, when he ain't that good, karma always comes to get him or her. I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you, Jacoby Myers a few weeks ago, when Mac Jones got benched, got mouthy. Now, Jacoby Myers has accomplished nothing other than being the NFL, which is a hell of an accomplishment. But Jacoby Myers was the mouth. They benched Mac Jones. Guess who got mad? Jacoby Myers. Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. Well, now guess what? Who made the biggest mistake? Jacoby Myers.
Second hour, Monday edition. We're recapping the fun football weekend and all the headlines. OutKick 360 from 6th and Peabody with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine with Chad Withrow. I'm Jonathan Hutton. And coming up, Brad Crawford will join us from 24/7 Sports. We'll discuss bowl season, the transfer portal, and much more.
Christmas week is here, Hutton.
Yes, it is.
Isn't that crazy?
Are you done with your shopping?
This is one that really snuck up on me. Usually I feel like it goes a little slower. I finished up most of my shopping today before the show, but I still have a couple things to get.
On a scale of like really, really difficult to super easy, with the young girls that you have, for what they wanted for Christmas, difficult or easy to find?
I will be completely and bluntly honest right now.
You don't know.
I have not done a second worth of shopping for either one of my daughters. My wife does.
Well, you know what they want, though, right?
She has to go through and show me a couple nights before Christmas. Here's what you're getting your kids.
Gotcha.
And she shows, so I know what they're getting. Now, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone watching, but there will be probably a 2 to 3 hour process every Christmas Eve that I have to put something together.
Sure.
That's going to be unveiled. And I know that I'm going to be, I believe, putting together a dollhouse.
A guest home.
My youngest daughter at some point. But other than that, it's I shop for Angie, and then I need to take Evie and Lucy to buy something for their mom.
Gotcha.
So that's the hardest part is, it sounds funny, like my daughters have a social calendar, but they really do. We have to sync up our schedules so I can actually have time to take both daughters to a store to pick out something for their mom. And I've not done that yet. So I finished up what I needed to for stocking stuffers, a few things today, and then I'll do the rest later. I went to a Target today, and it's clear now is when people are starting to get out of school and kids are around. And I mean, it's like every Christmas movie you've ever witnessed in any shopping scene. I walked in there and I was amazed at the amount, not just of car traffic, but the foot traffic just trying to get through the cars to get into Target.
Yeah,
was insane.
Growing up, me, my brother, my sister, we would all go shopping on Black Friday with my aunt. We would hit up different malls, and it was awesome because we would pick out like exactly what we wanted, and we had to wait for it, but we had an idea about what we would get, and then we could also shop for everyone else, and I enjoyed that. I hate being in a mall or in a store right now this time of year. Like I guess it gives me some type of anxiety, but it's like a goal of me to just get out of there as quickly as possible. And when I can't, I get livid. I get really upset, and I try not to let myself get to that level. But then stupid people allow me to reach that level based on how they're acting around other people on shopping for Christmas. It makes no sense. And I just want to get in and out and not have to have a ton of conversation and not have to wait in line for an hour. And there's not enough people working where you can avoid that.
I don't like being approached by people all the time when I'm shopping in a store. And also, I like the process of being in the mall and just walking around. And I'm happy to do it with anyone that knows where they're going. Yeah. And I can just kind of stroll around with them and look around. And
instead
it's fun
of surveying.
To listen to the music and smell all the smells and taste all the food and do all that. It's fun in a shopping mall. But if I have a task and I am tasked to go to a store and get something, I'm going right to that aisle and finding it. Or you need to tell me where you like to shop and where I'm going to get something. So if I'm going to a popular spot here around Nashville, Green Hills Mall. If I'm going to Green Hills Mall, I need to know, what store do you like? I'm going into that store, and I can shop in that store. But, Hutton, if you told me, go to Green Hills Mall and find something.
Find something.
No way. I mean, I would be overwhelmed by the amount of options. I'm over. When you get to 2 or 3 levels of a mall, I'm overwhelmed by that. But then seeing all the stores, that's difficult. But if you gave me a store and said, I would like anything you can find from here because I love this store, that's fun. If I'm just in one spot. If I can silo it off, then it's fun. But if not, it can be overwhelming.
And then the parking.
I've often talked about too many choices we have. We get overwhelmed by choice. And I just want things narrowed down to 2 or 3 things. And it's
Sometimes
much easier to make decisions
I just want
that
one
way.
Choice.
Yeah. But when you have all those choices, it's overwhelming. I get it.
Hit us up with your thoughts at OutKick 360, where you can follow us on social. And you can also download the podcast if you miss any portion of the show at any time. You can find our audio wherever you download your audio just by searching out the show.
See, YouTube is blowing up now with shopping discussions.
Yes.
Tony says I do all my shopping online. See, that sounds even more miserable to me.
But there are certain things you have to see. I have to see in person. Maybe you don't, Tony. There are certain things I have to see in person before purchasing said item. Not everything. And then once I purchase it one time, I know what it's like.
Well, we've talked about
I hate returning things.
The Instagram algorithm has us locked in. Yeah. So I see something every day when I'm scrolling through Instagram. I want that. So I can see that, and if I go to it, I want to buy it. I don't. I refrain from doing it. But oftentimes I'll click on the ad because I really like something I saw. But that would be the extent of my shopping. If you said, just go find this online, then once again, I'm drowning in too many options and I get anxious.
This was going to be a great showdown. We're going to recap Week 15. But as we look ahead, there is a headline out there. It involves sports betting and how Vegas tends to know before the public. So the Christmas Eve showdown, Sunday afternoon on Fox, is Philadelphia-Dallas. We've been leading up to this all season. But with Dallas's loss to Jacksonville and Philadelphia continuing to win 25-20 yesterday over the Chicago Bears, the line opened at Dallas -1.5. This is in Arlington. And it is now at -5. Dallas favored by 5, which the only way that line moves is if Jalen Hurts isn't playing that much. And I think that Vegas knows that they're thinking about sitting him for the game. They're not going to play him because they've got everything locked up.
That did jump out to me when I saw that. And you've been hyping this game for a while, Hutton. I'm excited to see it.
I wasn't expecting Dallas to lose.
That Dallas loss to Jacksonville put a damper on this game.
And the way it happened, because they got up early, Dallas did.
There were 2 scores at halftime. I thought it was over.
And I picked Jacksonville to win outright. But, man, the way that Trevor Lawrence is spinning it and the rapport he has built within that offense, and you can tell they're starting to get really comfortable in what they're doing. And then how they won the game in overtime with the pick 6. But it wasn't like a horrible throw by Dak Prescott.
No,
it was a great play.
It was a bad set of circumstances. The receiver basically kind of volleyball set it for the interception. It was bad by the receiver more than anything. It was a tough throw and catch, but it was one could have been caught, and it was just a bad circumstance that led to it caroming off the receiver to the DB for the touchdown. Let's recap the NFL weekend, and let's just start with Saturday and the largest comeback in NFL history, the greatest comeback we've seen. Down 33-0, the Vikings come back and win 39-36 late in overtime, where I think we're headed for another tie, and the Vikings pull it off to where they can now claim they've pulled off the greatest comeback. And we'll have some audio, I believe, later in the show on the locker room speech from O'Connell. But O'Connell, keep in mind, O'Connell was with the Rams whenever Tampa Bay in the postseason pulled the comeback with Brady. Almost pulled it off.
And then led the return score to win it. And he was with an offense last year. They were the first team to win the Super Bowl that got there by winning throughout the playoffs by 3 points. And tight games. He's now 10-0 as head coach in one-possession games for the Minnesota Vikings. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think he has figured out the algorithm, since we'll use that to talk about the algorithm for this Vikings offense to where they don't feel like they're ever truly out of it based on the playmakers they have. And despite how bad Kirk Cousins was playing in that first half, Chad, this is a team that with Jefferson and Thielen finally getting his first catch in the second half when they pulled the comeback, and just finding ways to get Dalvin Cook the football. Madison can certainly run it as well out of the backfield. And defensively, they've got to find more consistency. But this is a team that, I wouldn't put them up there with Cincinnati as a team I wouldn't want to play. I would rather play the Vikings than the 49ers right now, even with Brock Purdy. But to me, this is also a team that can get hot and get on a roll. And they did that over the final 2 quarters in overtime.
Yeah, what really impressed me, too, but Dalvin Cook, we know, is very good, and 17 carries for 95 yards. But him in the receiving game, 4 catches for another 95 for Dalvin Cook. KJ Osborne, 10 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah.
And then you combine that. That's how you get back in a game down 33-0. Combine 22 catches for 280 yards between Osborne and Jefferson in that game. When they had to get cooking, it was those guys doing the cooking for the Vikings. That's an impressive team that does have quick strike ability and can get back in a game. But we can sit here and argue about, are they lucky or are they just really good in close game settings? I think, Hutton, when you're that good in one-score games, it's probably a little bit of both. But what outweighs it is that you're good in those situations. I don't think you just chalk it up to luck.
Well, you can find
and say,
a way.
oh, they're a fraud and they're the luckiest team. I don't buy that. I think if you're looking at what is the ratio of good in those moments versus luck, there is some luck involved. But when you're as good as the Vikings are in close games and winning that way, I think it's more 80-20 good in those situations as opposed to luck. And I saw a lot of that in this game on Saturday.
It is the war of attrition, and that's what's happening with the Baltimore Ravens because they've got to get Lamar Jackson back.
This game was misery.
It was. Even Justin Tucker, Mr. Consistency, Pro Football Hall of Famer to be, is missing field goals in this game, something you don't see. And the bewilderment on the face of John Harbaugh in this game, also something you don't normally see. Meanwhile, Cleveland picks up a win, 13-3, in a week where Baltimore had a layup here in the snow. Their kind of grinded out game, low scoring, get 2 touchdowns, couldn't get it, and now Cincinnati's going to control the North. Baltimore continues to scramble because they've got to get Jackson back in the mold.
Well, if you would have told me that J.K. Dobbins had 13 carries for 125 yards in this game, I would have told you that, Baltimore probably played their style, and even with Tyler Huntley, won 14-10 in this game. But losing 13-3 against a Browns offense that still is just not much with Deshaun Watson, 18 for 28, 161, and a touchdown for Watson. Not good enough. This was the weak link of what could have been just the most unbelievable Saturday of NFL football we've ever witnessed with that NFL Network triple header.
It's a great point because the Bills and Dolphins delivered. The weather, all of the circumstances.
The snowballs being thrown in live action was just one of the coolest things I've ever witnessed.
And then the snow at the end of the game.
Well, at first I thought, I'm watching, I'm thinking, was a flag thrown? Because I saw something come flying in at a Dolphins player. I'm thinking, those are snowballs. So when they got down close to the end zone and the Dolphins were thrown into the end zone, they're getting pelted with snowballs in that end zone. And I know that an announcement was made to the crowd, but for a while it was just accepted as fact that, hey, you're going to get hit with snowballs when you come down on this end. It was awesome to see.
A 2-minute warning playing the Christmas music and NFL Network sticking with it. The whole thing was really, really great. And Buffalo hitting the field goal as time expires. But Josh Allen finding a way to drive down the field to get the game tied up. And then you have the game-winning field goal. And also keep in mind, Tua had possession midway through the fourth as well. A chance to answer. And didn't do it. They give the football back, and then we see the drive that ends up winning it. Allen delivers in the fourth quarter. And they're turning it over some. They're not as consistent as maybe what we saw to begin the season. But I do think this is a team that truly believes in their big stars. And while they're down Von Miller, they know they have the guy, both in the pass and the run. He added, 77 yards rushing, I believe. And this is now their 4th game-winning drive this season. You put the ball in his hands, he's going to get points. And he's also going to take advantage of the clock and milk it down to where you have no time left to do anything.
A couple of observations weather-wise. The snow didn't come until late in the game. I thought the Bills crowd got louder as the snow started falling harder late in the game, which was cool. Quarterbacks are, to me, way smarter about how to handle the elements. Keeping their hands warm, they put the slits in the jersey so they can put their hands in. But I thought both Tua and Josh Allen were remarkably unaffected by a driving snow. When Josh Allen got the ball with the Bills, and that first pass to Diggs on that drive, that was perfect. And even the receiver, Diggs, diving to the turf.
Yes.
No problem with slipping, getting the catch. I was blown away by their ability to play right through that and not just run the ball. but continue to run their offense, continue to run their passing game. Tua at times late in the game, if you noticed, I mean, he was completely bundled up. Just his eyes were showing on the sideline where he's trying to stay warm while he's sitting on the sideline. I think in those situations, it is important not to be, especially for the quarterback, the tough guy with no sleeves on, and make sure you're doing what you need to keep your hands warm enough when you get back on the field. Guys are smarter about that now.
Yeah, I'm with you on Tua. I thought he played well. He was spinning the football, too, in that he has not performed well results-wise in the cold. This was a game that midway through the fourth, I thought they were going to handle. I thought the Dolphins were going to win this game and return to Miami with more answers on Tua and the fact he can go on the road and win this type of game. Instead, they lose. They're currently the 7th seed based on the playoffs as of today because the Chargers bump up to 6 with their win, and they have the head-to-head against Miami from Week 14. 3 weeks to play, though, and the way the Patriots lost, the Dolphins, they're getting in. This is the team that, to me, is not going to slip out of the postseason.
And it's a very good team. I mean, they had a great chance to pull off the upset on the road.
We'll get to the Sunday matchups from Week 15 coming up later in the show. When we come back, Brad Crawford's going to join us, 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports, and we'll discuss the portal craziness. Bowl season is upon us, and we're about to get into the heart of the better matchups, at least the perceived, Chad, better matchups.
We got a bowl game going on right now, Hud.
Yeah, and we'll give the scoreboard update on that as well. Brad Crawford next on OutKick 360.
Welcome into the Trey Wallace podcast on this somber week as we remember head coach Mike Leach of Mississippi State. Also get into a couple other topics, but I'm Trey Wallace, happy to be joined by my boy Jake Crane here from Crane and Company. Every single morning you can catch them. Jake, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Trey, man, appreciate you having me. I'm doing well. Obviously, some sad news on the forefront, not only in the college football world, but the sports world in general with the passing of Mike Leach. But it's been a while since me and you've been able to get together, and even though the circumstances are rather grim, I'm always glad to see you.
No, trust me, man. The feelings are mutual, and it's just looking back on yesterday and the last couple of days with Mike Leach and everything that went down. Your first thoughts on Sunday when we all start getting news and we all start hearing about everything that's happened with Coach Leach. The first things that come to your mind when that goes down, Jake.
Well, once kind of the shock wears off a little bit to where you kind of get in a normal headspace again and are able to take kind of a 30,000 view look at it. The memories pop up, obviously, of the funny media moments and the big wins. I mean, you look at the pass to Crabtree in the game versus Texas is an iconic play, and really throughout his career, how integral he was in the air raid, going back all the way with Hal Mumme at Iowa Wesleyan, where they invented it basically and named it. It was kind of his baby, and he was part of that air raid. Spread you out, replace modified runs, replace the run game with the pass game, and pass to run. But the thing I think that I ended up getting the most from the sad news, outside of it not looking good and the shock value wearing off, as I mentioned, was that Coach Leach was something I think that we're losing more of every day in our society. He was genuinely himself.
Yes,
he had his principles. He had his ideas, and whether you like them or not, he wasn't going to change them. And in a society like we're in today, where everybody goes with the woke mob or what's in or what's not going to get them, in trouble per se, or looked at as a terrible person, it was refreshing almost. So that's what I kept coming back to. That's what we talked about on the show, is just his genuine ability to be himself. And it's sad that that's an anomaly in society today, but it is.
Isn't it crazy to have a coach like Mike Leach who was not afraid to say what was on his mind? It doesn't matter if it was post-game. It doesn't matter if it's a midweek conversation. It doesn't, I went back and watched something last night, Jake, and he was talking about student debt and how he would rather spend a month in jail than have to pay off his student debt, and how it hurts society and it hurts the kids and they can't get out of it and whatnot. but he was not the one to ever hold back on anything. And you couldn't, I don't think the ADs at Tech, at State, at Mississippi State, and I was referring to Washington State, I don't think they wanted to hold him back. He was his own type of man, and I think that's what made him special, brother.
Yeah, no, and you know that he's an old school football coach at heart too. If you kind of see the way he goes about things, so it's such a unique blend. You could go across the globe, and I don't think find another person that's super similar to Mike Leach in his personality. But yeah, I mean, let me ask you this: if I drove across the country when Joe Moorhead was the head coach at Mississippi State and asked high school football recruits, "Tell me the head coach at Mississippi State," a lot of them are not going to know that it's Joe Moorhead, but those same kids that wouldn't know, if I would have driven through during his tenure, would have known that Mike Leach was at Mississippi State.
About to talk some college football, but first, an update on quarterback Jalen Hurts for the Philadelphia Eagles. He suffered a sprained shoulder in yesterday's game against the Bears. He did finish the game, and he threw a 68-yard touchdown pass to A.J. Brown, but that's why we saw the Vegas line move to 5. Cowboys favored by 5 on Christmas Eve. The Gardner Minshew show, Chad.
I mean, but Hutton, you said it during the break. Vegas always knows.
They always know first, yeah.
They knew. They knew right away.
Brad Crawford joins us. I bet he knew before we did. Brad Crawford of CBS.
He could have broken the news on our show
Maybe
when we
so.
asked about it.
Maybe so.
He knew all along.
Brad, how are you, man? Good to see you.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me today.
Craziest story you've heard in the portal since it opened a couple of weeks ago?
I'll give you a story about a guy that did not enter the portal, but got crazy offers to do so. UNC quarterback Drake May. One of our guys reported today that 2 schools offered him $4 million for the 2023 season had he left the Tar Heels and probably gone to an SEC program. So good of Mac Brown to convince him to stay in Chapel Hill, but man, they're paying a premium right now, big time programs on elite quarterbacks.
That's the amazing part of this. We talk so much about the 5-star, freshmen that are incoming, but when you can go get a proven commodity for any of these programs, say, well, I know what Drake May looks like in college. You don't really know until the 5-star gets on campus. 2 programs I want to ask you about, though, Brad, that have been hit pretty hard by the transfer portal so far that surprises me because of what we assume about their culture within the program. South Carolina under Shane Beamer, Arkansas under Sam Pittman. If you ask me to define 2 really strong programs with a strong culture that's fun, but also they know what type of players they want and what they're getting, I would say those 2 programs, and especially with South Carolina finishing the season as strong as they did, what is going on with those 2 programs and some of the transfers we've seen leave?
Yeah, starting with the Gamecocks, man, it surprises me as well, being a close follower of that program, knowing a lot of that staff personally. I mean, this is a Gamecocks team that humiliated Tennessee, knocked them out of the playoff race with 63 points, second to last week of this season. Then they ended Clemson's 40-game home winning streak. Really, you're talking about a program with more momentum than it's had in more than a decade since Spurrier's, 3 consecutive 11-2 top 10 finishes. And then the Gamecocks have a couple decommitments this week. They lose Jaheim Bell and Marshawn Lloyd to the portal, 2 starters who were going to be, early round picks upcoming NFL draft. So I think for Shane Beamer and his staff, they're surprised right now. And a lot of it has to do with NIL. South Carolina, it's not a surprise that the Gamecocks are behind other SEC programs in that category. And I think in Jaheim Bell's case, outgoing OC Marcus Satterfield did not give him the football half the season. I think they tried to make up for it in November, pushing him from tight end to running back, but it just didn't matter. And then at Arkansas, I mean, no program in college football, fellas, has had a worse 2 weeks than the Hogs. You lose Barry Odom to UNLV. You lose Dow Loggins, your tight ends coach, to South Carolina as their new OC. And Sam Pittman came out yesterday during his first availability of December and just said, for the guys that left us and entered the portal, we pretty much don't want them back. So, right now, those two coaches, entering their third seasons at Arkansas and South Carolina, they are struggling right now. And it's not the only staffs. I mean, right now, there's a ton of college football staffs that are just extremely frustrated with this new recruiting calendar and just how difficult December becomes.
Yeah, and it's tough to make any sweeping judgments about teams based on the start also, because they could, in the next transfer portal window in spring, they could rack up with players. We don't know how it's going to end. We know how it's going right now at Florida, and it's not good with that current roster. They get blown out by Oregon State. They're doing well in recruiting. Brad, how are they doing in the transfer portal, and just how extensive is this rebuild for Billy Napier?
Yeah, I think watching the Las Vegas Bowl over the weekend, you kind of saw a team that, was ready for that game to be over with before it started and get back to recruiting. Florida right now, as of a few hours ago, I think has a number 11 class in the country for 2023. Obviously, Anthony Richardson declared for the draft. Then you have Jalen Kitten that got dismissed. So Florida started a third-string quarterback with essentially no collegiate reps against Oregon State, and you saw what happened. The team, really, really struggled there. But Billy Napier, if he can secure a top 10 class, a couple guys maybe, Grayson McCall, Coastal Carolina quarterback, I know Napier had him on campus recently. They're trying to get him. Some other schools in line for him, maybe Auburn and Hugh Freeze. So Florida needs a plug-and-play quarterback for next season, and they're not going to get it in the 2023 class with Rashada. He's not going to be a true freshman starter. So I think they have to go portal quarterback. And Florida's a team that if they don't have good quarterback play next season, I mean, look, it's probably another 6-6 type season.
Brad Crawford with us, 24/7 Sports. How surprising is it to you that Alabama doesn't have a single player sitting out of their bowl game against Kansas State?
I was telling a coworker this morning, I don't know how Nick Saban always does this outside of the fact that Bama's usually in the playoff. Unless Bryce Young and Will Anderson maybe have something in their NIL contract that us media types haven't seen where they have to finish the season to get paid. It really speaks to Nick Saban's culture within those walls. As the season was going on, all you heard kind of off the field associated with Bama was, which of these two coordinators, Bill O'Brien or Pete Golding, was going to be replaced. Neither has so far. Maybe we see that after the early signing period. But, right now, I mean, Bama heads into the Sugar Bowl with what looks to be a full arsenal. And that's why you've seen that spread go from, Bama minus 2.5 to, I think it's a touchdown now, where Bryce Young and Will Anderson really want to put a exclamation part on this Bama career.
Both of these wins will be impactful if both of these teams get it for the scenario I'm going to throw out. And I'm normally not on board with a bowl win carries over for momentum. But more impactful on the positive sense, Brad. South Carolina beating Notre Dame with the way they finished the season, or Tennessee knocking off Clemson and getting some sense of who Joe Milton can be. Not what he's been, but who he can be.
Yeah, I think Tennessee having a chance to finish potentially inside the top 5. Depending on how these playoff games go, we've seen since the playoff era started, most of these semifinal games are 3-touchdown, lopsided affairs. So if you see TCU get blown out, Ohio State get blown out, Tennessee with a backup quarterback and really their second and third string wideouts, they go down to Miami and beat Clemson by a pretty good margin, then Tennessee's probably finishing 11-2 inside the top 5. At least that's where my vote would go. So I think it's huge for Josh Heupel as far as closing out this 2023 recruiting cycle. I know most of the Vol signees will finish things up this week, but there's going to be some portal guys maybe that may look at Tennessee, because everybody I've talked to through NIL, Tennessee is a top 5 program right now in terms of what those collectives in Knoxville can give incoming players. So I think Tennessee's a team that maybe more so than South Carolina, based on NIL, can end this season with considerably more momentum heading into 2023 spring.
And I think Josh Heupel will get a bonus if he wins that New Year's Six bowl game, and I believe he might get another one with a top 5 finish. So it could be a very profitable game for Josh Heupel if, like you said, they finish the top 5 with that win over Clemson. It was profitable for a bunch of freshmen in College Station this year, but nothing profitable for Aggies fans on the field this season. What a disastrous year after what has been heralded as maybe the best in terms of rankings, recruiting class in history. And now, Brad, we see all those guys hitting the transfer portal. What do you do to reset right now if you're Jimbo Fisher? And are they in need of a complete reset, or can they tweak a few things and just keep things rolling back to where they were a couple of years ago at Texas A&M?
Yeah, I think A&M's had 26 defections since the season ended. Somehow beat LSU in that finale. I don't know how that happened. Texas A&M should have finished 4-8 this year, but really played out of their mind for the first time in 3 months. But yeah, A&M was a team that I think started number 7, I want to say, preseason. I didn't have them inside the top 10. I thought they were a top 20 team because of talent, because of NIL, because of last year's recruiting class. That was the highest rated class ever, according to all of our 24/7 Sports insiders. And it just did not show up this season. This team was not tough at the line of scrimmage. I think quarterback play for A&M outside of Kellen Mond has not been all that great under Jimbo Fisher. That's a major issue that needs to be corrected. And, Jimbo has to shrink that 72-page stack of papers he has of what he calls a playbook. I mean, he has to kind of give that up a little bit, let somebody else come in there and fix things offensively, because right now on third down, A&M was, as you guys mentioned, horrid this season. And it really showed in some of those bad early season losses. The team did look a little bit better down the stretch. They play with some pride, but A&M's a team that needs all the talent it can to stay in College Station. And I think that starts with quarterback play. They have to be better under center next season to be a legitimate national title contender.
Well, Brad, not only because of the money, and I'm always going to think Texas A&M first. That's who I thought of when you mentioned Drake May and the $4 million offer. I don't know. It could be multiple SEC programs. I know that.
I would throw Bama and Georgia in that mix too.
That would not be bad, going from Bryce Young to Drake May if you were Bama.
I'm also thinking, who would he turn down? If I'm Drake May, I'm not turning down Georgia or Alabama.
And I know for a fact UNC did not match those reported offers. So Drake May's family is big time UNC. I know that family is well to do.
Yeah.
Drake May doesn't need the money, and he's pretty much a top 5 lock for 2024. So it would have been very interesting though to see him against a tougher schedule, to see if those numbers would have indeed flourished again.
Is there a program outside of the SEC? We spend so much time looking at how active the SEC is with the transfer portal, because the money involved with the boosters and everyone involved in that conference. Is there a program, though, outside of the SEC right now that you circle and say they're really getting it done and they have a great NIL strategy mixed with a good recruiting coaching staff that knows how to work the portal? I'll throw one example out there with what Michigan has done so far. Is that a program to watch in terms of mastering the portal?
I'll give you one more surprising Big Ten team that I think will be national title caliber maybe 3 years from now. That's Nebraska. NIL at Nebraska is top 5. And I think Nebraska made, maybe along with Wisconsin, the home run hire of this cycle, getting Matt Rule to, after he was fired from the Panthers, to come down. So I think Matt Rule's going to be a guy that, he has shown at Baylor that he can develop 3-stars into premier Power 5 starters. And now through NIL, something he didn't have at Baylor, as long as this stuff doesn't get regulated, he's going to be able to kind of pick and choose guys that he wants to have on campus. They hosted several 4-stars over the weekend that may be signing day flip. So that's something to watch. And then Ohio State just lost one of the top 2024 5-star quarterbacks, Dylan Raiola. And the rumor is around our organization is Nebraska is kind of the front runner there for him. So if they're able to land a 5-star quarterback next cycle, then you're going to see a lot of people jumping on Nebraska's wagon, and I think it's warranted.
Brad Crawford with us, 24/7 Sports. how quickly has Hugh Freeze jumped into the portal from what you've seen at Auburn, Brad? And how quickly can he improve that roster based on what we've seen even Lane Kiffin do from 2 years ago to last year?
Yeah, I think Auburn badly needs a running back after losing Tank Bigsby. And if I was a running back right now looking for another landing spot, I mean, Hugh Freeze's offense throws me the football. You know, it's a run heavy and quarterback friendly scheme. I'd be excited playing that. And I'm a little bit surprised that Hugh Freeze has tapped the portal and gotten some of these transfer quarterbacks on the plains for visits, because Robbie Ashford, I mean, you guys have watched, you know, Auburn football this season. In spots, he's a really good player. And Hugh Freeze is known as a quarterback whisperer of sorts who can develop guys. And I think they should move forward with, you know, Robbie Ashford as QB1. But it sounds like, you know, they're still interested in Grayson McCall, Coastal Carolina quarterback. I think they've had Devin Leary, NC State quarterback, on campus. So I think Hugh Freeze can maybe win 7 to 8 games next season if he implements this thing quickly. And I think it was the right, you know, hire for Auburn. Probably not from a PR standpoint. A lot of questions to still ask there. But, I mean, Hugh Freeze has beaten Nick Saban twice, and he did it at Ole Miss. So with better talent and more money at Auburn, you guys can put 2 and 2 together.
Well, and Ashford reminds me of Malik Willis. You talked about what Hugh Freeze has done. I think that's a reasonable comp of what he had at Liberty. So that does surprise me a bit that he might not just – he may end up still rolling with him, though.
And, Chad, you said that they just offered Dilfer's quarterback in high school, right?
Yeah, so Hank Brown,
yeah.
So Hank Brown from Lipscomb Academy, Hutton and I had his state championship game on TV, was just now offered as of today by Hugh Freeze. He was committed to Liberty. Hutton and I immediately said, oh, he'll follow his high school coach now to UAB instead of going to Liberty, but now he may have a chance to play in the SEC.
And I think Liberty's new head coach, Jamie Chadwell from Coastal, thought he was going to land Grayson McCall. But now that Auburn and Florida have jumped in the picture, I think it's down to those two, you know, for the former Coastal quarterback. So it's crazy, guys. I mean, this month has been just not only coaching carousel, but it's been quarterback carousel and NIL and coaches trying to re-recruit their own players who are, you know, already on roster. It's a wild time right now. Free agency, I mean, it really is what it is.
When we're recapping signing day later, Brad, is there a coach or a program that you think we're going to say, well, they really jumped out and maybe not surprised us, but they've improved to a level we didn't expect?
I think Colorado and Florida State are going to be big winners this week. Maybe ask that question Friday morning, 2 days after signing day. I think both of those schools are going to get some flips this week. Florida State's a team that has incredible momentum. You remember last early signing period losing you know, Travis Hunter, 5-star, to Jackson State. That was the gem of Mike Norvell's class. And so they recovered their top 20 class. And then they won 9 games this season, 5 straight to end it. And they have Jordan Travis coming back. So if I'm Travis Hunter, if Mike Norvell offers me and maybe gives me an opportunity to play both sides of the ball, I mean, Jordan Travis is a good quarterback. Or you can, you know, go to Colorado like everybody expects and play with Shedeur Sanders. So I think it'll be interesting, but Prime and FSU are going to have big weeks.
How many doors are open for Sanders, for Deion now at Colorado, that were not open just based on Jackson State and that level of play?
Yeah, I think a lot of Jackson State fans, at least ones who have emailed me and you know, asked me to talk to Deion about certain things, they're just upset that maybe he didn't finish what he promised when he started. Knowing Deion, he was never going to be a first-time college coach under somebody. He didn't want to be an assistant coach. He took Jackson State job because that was a chance to be a head coach. He was 11-0 this year before losing his first game, and he really turned that program around in just a couple years. I think he'll do the same at Colorado, but you're not going to see any double-digit win seasons. Colorado right now, I don't think has the money to just, you know, buy through NIL a complete new roster. And looking at the 2023 schedule for the Buffaloes, there's probably 3 or 4 games where Colorado might be favored, and the other 8, they're a double-digit dog. So I think Deion has his work cut out for him. But, you know, we saw Lincoln Riley quickly in year 1 turn things around rather fast at USC. Deion's not going to have that level of success, but I think getting to a bowl game in 2023 is realistic for Colorado.
There's been a long-standing feud between Texas and Tennessee about who is the real UT, between the UT and the burnt orange.
SEC guy, so
and I went to Tennessee, so you know my answer to that question. But now there's a debate brewing about Arch Manning versus Nico Iamaleava in terms of the rankings kind of flipping back and forth with those two guys and who's going to have the better college career. When you look at both those guys as recruits, we all know the Manning name. We know the lineage. We know how good he was in high school, how good he could be. What does the upside look like for Nico at Tennessee under Josh Heupel, and how would you compare the two quarterbacks?
I think Nico is in a much better scheme fit friendly system for quarterbacks. I think Hendon Hooker should have been a Heisman finalist this season, but I don't necessarily think Hendon Hooker would have been a elite quarterback in a pro style system, a spread system. This is a perfect system for Nico's talent level. I think he's going to put up really good numbers early in his career. And for Arch Manning, while he's a great player and the highlight tape shows it, he's got a lot to live up to. Mm-hmm. I think he's going to be in a greater spotlight than Nico will. Texas entering the SEC probably in 2 seasons from now, when Arch is likely the starter as a sophomore once Quinn Ewers leaves. So I think that there's just tons of pressure on Arch Manning, and it's always difficult to live up to being the number one player in the country in your class. I mean, very, very few number one overall players do that. And I think maybe Tua was the last one to do so. So I think there's just immense pressure on Arch. And if I'm him, he's kind of been signed to be the Texas savior, right? So anything less than 10-2 when he's a starter, and it's probably a failure in Austin. So that's a ton of pressure on that kid.
Yeah, and just putting a wrap on this, to your point there on Arch Manning, he faces so much pressure to live up to, guys, but at the same time, any Manning in the spotlight typically lives up to expectation. If you think about any situation, those guys typically meet the bar. They meet the criteria that we hold them to, fair or unfair.
Well, and he seems to be about the right things.
Yeah.
I mean, that family and Arch, he's handled it as professional as a 17, 18-year-old kid could in these circumstances.
I think so too. And I mean, you don't want to be the recruiting organization that puts Arch Manning number 8 overall versus number 1, and then he goes and has 3 incredible years for the Longhorns, brings them back to prominence. And then, most analysts I've spoke to think that his ceiling is obviously number 1 overall pick. And I don't know if we're saying the same thing about Nico, but I think when it's all said and done, both those guys are going to put up great numbers in college. But Nico's system under Josh Heupel, it just screams production, right?
Follow Brad on social at bcrawford247. Brad Crawford has been our guest, 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports as well. Brad, thank you for the time, man. Great insight, and enjoy the coverage this week.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, great insight. And we will certainly be checking back in with him throughout the more recruiting process and more bowl game action as well throughout the bowl season. We've got some Vegas odds to get to with the notable injuries across the NFL coming up, Chad. It includes the MVP favorite right now.
Hey, speaking of bowl season, we got a bowl game going on right now. Hutton, it's your favorite game, the Myrtle Beach Bowl.
It's there.
Hutton's a big fan of the Myrtle Beach Bowl. It's 21-0 Marshall over UConn with 12:44 left in the third. I think Marshall was an 11.5-point favorite coming into this game. They're handling business right now.
Double the spread.
The Thundering Herd
double the spread.
Are looking to even more than double that spread.
Coming up, notable NFL injuries from Week 15 as teams start to try to close out the season on a high note. Some of their best players really banged up. That's next on OutKick 360.
Yeah, I think because things, transitioned from that regime side to that fundamentalist side. So we also had to change some of our tactics and our procedures and everything else and how we did things to cope with these guys, because they were coming up with some ingenious ways of doing things along the line as well, with some of the IEDs, some of the, the booby trapping the houses, things like that, using the cell phones to call to detonate everything. So it became, I think, as much as you say, more violent in that way, because with the regime guys too, we knew that there was the end state was trying to get Saddam, so that we needed intel as well. We needed to gather that intelligence. There was only so much that was there from previous, just historical data. Then we had to actually make it real intel and workable intel. But with the fundamentalists, if you gave them a chance to vote, and we'd say vote based off, okay, does this guy want to is he going to go along with the capture, or is he wanting to fight? And then let's let's see who wins. They would rather fight than do anything. There was, so many times guys would detonate suicide vests because it's like, well, they're not going to take me, clack themselves off, thinking they're killing, other folks around them. But they just, I don't know, they just were different folks, and it was like we had to get more violent in a way, because again, we were going after intel and doing things, and our procedures and everything on the battlefield just had to kind of adjust, just like they were doing.
That's crazy. I truly cannot imagine. And I was in college. I started college in 2010. So I was in high school when things were getting kind of real bad in the 06, 07 era. And I remember people would always talk about do we really need to be fighting these guys? Are they really that bad? And I'm like, this Zarqawi guy is literally chopping people's heads off, right? And don't think it stops there. Like if this guy could, he'd chop all of our heads off too. Fortunately, they dropped a couple bombs on him, I believe, if I recall correctly. So now I want to get into some comparing and contrasting. What were the big differences between fighting in Iraq versus fighting in Afghanistan? Was it mostly the terrain? Was it the level of the combatant? Like, what were the big takeaways that were different from each other?
I think early on with Afghanistan was, everything was so spread out. Everything was so far in between, and we didn't have many helo assets early in the war, just because of how, basically really having to share them along with the other task force and things like that. And so there was a lot more driving, or you would get flown to an area and then you'd be there for a bit, and then, you're not getting there, you're not getting back to your home base for a while. So you're trying to make do of it and literally just sometimes sitting around doing nothing. But then within Iraq, you had more cities, bigger cities, everything else that we were hitting. Granted, you had Kandahar, you had Kabul, but everything really wasn't happening in those locations. It was farther out because, where the terrorists had their training camps from, years before us ever getting there. But then within Iraq, they could hide right there in the cities. There were, so much, just open roads, everything around. And everything else, at a lot more built up areas, and it was an easier road system to get around. So it made it easier for them as well to move around. The terrain, definitely changed throughout. Iraq, you had your river valleys in a way, and you had the humidity, you had palm groves, everything else, and then you had your rocky mountain areas, dry areas. But then Afghanistan was just so severe with the mountains. I mean, that that's some treacherous terrain in itself.
Notable injuries across the NFL start with the MVP favorite right now. Well, maybe not right now. We'll get to that. But with Jalen Hurts, sprained shoulder, suffered late in the game against the Chicago Bears. He did finish the game, but now his status for this coming week against Dallas is uncertain. Chances are, based on all this, he's not going to play. With the lead that the Eagles certainly have and the top seed and the way they've been playing, they need to make sure that he's ready to go for the postseason. It is not a collarbone injury that has been floated out there. Jordan Schultz reporting that it is not a collarbone issue, that is a sprained shoulder, and that they're going to do everything necessary to make sure he gets the necessary rest to be ready for playoffs. But here's where it really affects everything. So now it has flipped from this morning, Jalen Hurts was the Vegas favorite for NFL MVP. It has already flipped to Patrick Mahomes, who is now minus 225. And Hurts was like plus 180 this morning. And that injury alone, Vegas is saying, is going to, odds are, keep him from being able to play a couple of games, and that's where Mahomes will take over and win MVP. So beyond just on the field, off the field awards with this will be affected. And certainly Gardner Minshew is capable of playing well, but this is the guy that makes gives the gasoline to the engine that is full of plenty of horsepower.
I would still bet on Jalen Hurts, especially now the odds are swinging against him. I think now would be a good time to still bet on him for NFL MVP.
The other injuries of note, Chad, we've got Justin Fields, who was just, according to reports, just cramping up in that game. Nothing serious. Travis Etienne with an ankle issue, as well as Austin Eckler, who had an ankle issue but came back into the game yesterday against the Titans. Justin Jefferson, he checked out during the Saturday game, came back in and still performed at a very high level after having a chest injury. And Jonathan Taylor left the game. He played just 2 snaps against the Vikings and then suffered an ankle injury. And Colt McCoy with a concussion. Of course, they were already down Kyler Murray. Now Colt McCoy in concussion protocol. So Trace McSorley, who was fighting for the backup job in the preseason in Arizona, now with the Cardinals group that's been eliminated from postseason play. He is the guy right now in Arizona. Ryan Tannehill left the game yesterday against the Chargers, was carted off to the locker room to have his ankle retaped. Whenever he was carted off, we thought he was done for the day. But it has been an issue. It is continues to be an issue for the Titans quarterback that they need. He is putting them in position, albeit not to score points, but putting them in position to at least keep drives alive and at least not turn the football over. And at a minimum, he is going 6 for 6 on the final drive for Tennessee to get that game tied, where ultimately Justin Herbert takes over and they kick the game-winning field goal.
And if you think, he came back in the game, he'll be fine, he'll play next week. This happened earlier this year against Indianapolis, and he missed the next 2 games with injury, even though he came back in that game and played. Hud, my question would be, if this is setting up to be a win and in scenario at the end of the year with Jacksonville, do you rest him and get him as healthy as possible for that game and roll with Malik Willis against the Texans, who he's already beaten? He did nothing in the game to beat them, but they won because their defense, and they won in Houston. So you play Malik Willis in this game and against the Cowboys and then get Tannehill back for the season finale? Is that something the Titans are thinking about?
I would be thinking that way, because I find it very difficult to not see Jacksonville with an opportunity to punch their ticket to the playoffs as AFC South champion, based on the way the Titans are playing and based on the scenario here. So what has to happen? The Titans need to win 2 games, and they need Jacksonville to lose 1 game. If that happens, the Titans are the AFC South champs. But because they continue to lose and Jacksonville beat them head-to-head in Week 14, and of course they beat Dallas, the Titans lost to the Chargers. The Jags are now 1 game behind the Titans for the AFC South lead. They hold the tiebreaker right now over the Titans with the head-to-head win. And their upcoming schedule, they have the Jets on Thursday. Then they have the Texans before finishing with the Titans. The Titans have Houston, who's playing very well over the last 2 weeks against top competition, Dallas and Kansas City. This Titans team isn't beating that Houston team that we've seen over the last 2 weeks. And then they have the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday night, followed by the game in Jacksonville. it's difficult to not see Week 18 and the playoff
being on the line in Jacksonville.
There. Yeah, and if they have the head-to-head, the one thing that they can't do is they need Jacksonville to lose, but they also Jacksonville they need one of their 2 wins to be against Tennessee. If they're going to lose one, they need to beat the Titans head-to-head, and they're certainly capable of it. We've seen it once before. And the AFC South is extremely interesting all of a sudden. Headlines next, including the crazy scene at the World Cup.
The fake punt Colts, Chuck Pagano against Bill Belichick. I think it was a Monday night or Sunday night football. The dumbest play in the history of football. The dumbest until yesterday. Now, Jacoby Myers, I'm going to set this up, ends up being the guy that screws it up royally. Stupidest play you're ever going to see. I would have cut him by the time the Chandler Jones got into the end zone. All right? Here's the call from the New England Radio Network, including Scott Zolak at the end. You got to hear it.
Now on a 3rd and 10, 3 seconds left. Jones will give it to Stevenson. He started to run. He runs it up the middle. Hit by Chandler. Jones slips the head across the 45 with a stiff arm. Off the tackle at the 40. He lost the football. And Jacoby Myers picks it up. He circles back and he throws it across the field to Mac Jones. It's picked up by Chandler Jones. He breaks away to the 30. He runs to the 20. He runs to the 10. He runs to the end zone. Unreal. Touchdown. Raiders.
Good night. This might be one of the dumbest teams I've ever seen.
Yes.
And a victory for Las Vegas.
This might be the dumbest teams I've ever seen. That sums it up. See, here's the deal. And as a coach, you know this. The guy that does the talk, when he ain't that good, karma always comes to get him or her. I'm telling you right now. I'm telling you, Jacoby Myers a few weeks ago, when Mac Jones got benched, got mouthy. Now, Jacoby Myers has accomplished nothing other than be in the NFL, which is a hell of an accomplishment. But Jacoby Myers was the mouth. They benched Mac Jones. Guess who got mad? Jacoby Myers. Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. Well, now guess what? Who made the biggest mistake? Jacoby Myers.
Final hour, OutKick 360, Monday edition. We're recapping all the big headlines from the weekend. Some great football finishes. We'll recap Week 15 across the NFL coming up in about 20 minutes. And continue to give you the latest on the NFL injuries, which includes Jalen Hurts, who is sidelined for the time being with a sprained shoulder. How serious of an issue is this? Well, we'll find out. His status is quote-unquote uncertain for the upcoming game, Christmas Eve. That's a 4:25 kickoff on Fox between Dallas and Philly. That's in Dallas. And what's a big game for the Cowboys, they know they're in the postseason. The question is where they're going to seed. And you've got the Eagles, who know they're also in, only with one loss on the season following their victory over Chicago yesterday, 25-20. But this certainly leaves this air of doom, quite frankly, if Hurts isn't able to go, and if this is more serious than what is being reported right now. Jordan Schultz has put out there that it's not a collarbone issue. I think that was the big fear. But, Chad, I know he finished the game, but these things, they tend to derail a season based on crucial injuries, and this is another example of this is a war of attrition in the NFL.
And there's some debate on whether or not from different reporters it's the throwing shoulder or his left non-throwing shoulder.
Which
I've
is
seen
also big.
Two separate reports. One is saying throwing, the other one is saying non-throwing. So we'll continue to look at that. Hutton, you mentioned the Vegas part of this. Cowboys were 2-point favorites versus the Eagles as of this morning. The line moved throughout the day. Now it's up to 5.5 for the Eagles with Jalen Hurts out for this game. This is huge. I mean, this is the best team in the NFL, and this is the NFL MVP. So it's big for the remaining regular season games, but the most important part of this is they have to have Jalen Hurts around for the playoffs. I'll also say, popped in my mind, the last time the Eagles were really good and had a quarterback injury, they went with their backup and went and won a Super Bowl in unlikely fashion with Nick Foles. Now, Jalen Hurts is far better than Carson Wentz, and he's having a far better season and bigger impact on this team than Carson Wentz was with the Eagles when they last won the Super Bowl, I think 2017.
Yep.
In the 2017 season. So it's a bigger deal, but hey, there's a franchise that's done it, and the Eagles are that franchise recently.
Jalen Hurts with a handful, 3 other touchdown runs yesterday, and he had 10 going into the game. He's now upped it to, he's got 40 touchdowns combined now for who was the MVP favorite. Right now in Vegas, it's flipped to Patrick Mahomes. Chad, a great finish to the World Cup with Argentina topping France with kicks at the end, and you've got the messy moment with everything, and then the scene of celebration in Argentina afterwards was incredible.
The Buenos Aires celebration was the coolest that I've ever seen. This is unlike anything I've ever witnessed in terms of the scale of people around the capital city for this celebration. Was remarkable. And it's so cool to see guys everyone knows.
Yes.
Lionel Messi, Mbappe, they delivered on the biggest stage. Really, really cool to watch this on Sunday morning and see, this game absolutely deliver. I took a flyer on it. Every Friday we do our what's going to be the big headline on Monday, and I just said, it's going to be something to do with the World Cup final. I don't know what. It's either going to be a blowout, a great game, an incident. It turned into one of the all-time classics. I don't know. I haven't studied every World Cup final, but everyone I follow on Twitter that watches soccer, including Carly Lloyd was one of them I saw from the U.S. women's national team, said greatest World Cup final ever between these two countries. So really, really cool to see what is always a terrific tournament every 4 years end in that fashion.
And Argentina wins for the first time since the 80s at getting that done. The Vikings win with the greatest comeback in NFL history. So you have Frank Reich, who's fired by Indy, who was the quarterback for the record-setting game with all of this to begin with. Then you end up having Jeff Saturday up 33-0. And here come the Minnesota Vikings outscoring them 36-3 in regulation, in the second half of regulation, then getting the field goal at the end of overtime. And for what looked like it was going to be a Jeff Saturday on a Saturday type performance, Chad, you mentioned like this would end up being their first victory over a playoff caliber team, and a good one at that. And on the road, quite frankly, it ends up being an incredible performance, and unquestionably we will not forget this performance in the second half based on how everything played out and just how bad it played out for Minnesota in the first half compared to the final 2 quarters and how things cratered. We won't see this again anytime soon.
Instead, this game became legendary for reasons Jeff Saturday and Matt Ryan never want to talk about again, including this stat that is remarkable. This from Josh Dubow of the AP. Teams leading by 30-plus points are 1,548, 1-1 in regular season and playoffs since 1930. The only teams who did not win, Oilers versus the Bills in the 92 playoffs, led 35-3. We all know about that one with Frank Reich at quarterback, lost 41-38. And then the Bills again versus the Broncos in 1960, led 38-7, ended up tying 38-38. Congratulations are in order here for the Indianapolis Colts for joining that very distinguished list. What ended up happening instead of Saturday winning on a Saturday was Jeff Saturday confirming there's no way he's going to be retained as the head coach for the Colts, and Matt Ryan joining a very dubious list of one to be a quarterback who blew the biggest lead in Super Bowl history and has now blown the biggest lead in NFL regular season history.
Well, and also know this. The Colts also allowed 33 points in the fourth quarter to Dallas earlier this year. So that was the second most points allowed in NFL history in the fourth quarter. And then they're outscored 36-3 and ultimately lose the game in overtime to Minnesota. And what's a big moment for the Minnesota Vikings, because they lock up the NFC North with the win. And you also have this moment of the team coming together with a rookie head coach and plenty of talent on the offensive side of the football. And the defense got it done against the Colts offense throughout this game. Here's O'Connell in the locker room post-game for Minnesota.
We set out a long time ago talking about doing one thing. And one thing first, before we talked about anything else. Congratulations, NFC North champs right there. But what I love about it the most, all right, when we came in this locker room at halftime, it couldn't get much worse. We couldn't have done more to allow that other team to win the football game. But I just felt it. I felt each and every one of you. I felt the captains with your C's on your chest, understanding that we were about to go break an all-time regular season or playoff record for comeback victory to win. When I tell you guys, I love you. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And that will never change. I will ride with this group until they don't let us play any more games. So bring it in tight, and then I want to hear you guys celebrate the 2022 NFC North Championship.
Can you tell he's been with Sean McVay?
Yeah, I love that guy. That right there, that video alone makes me love him even more. But that was awesome. And I love how he checked notes in the middle of it. We didn't know we were going to have the biggest NFL regular season or playoff comeback. I love that he looks down at the notes in the middle of the pep talk after the game. That was awesome.
And that, I mean, you can see, like, if the Vikings go on this crazy run now in the playoffs, we will look back to that moment. There's always that turning point, because they came in with 10 wins, and there were plenty of questions, though, about Minnesota and whether or not they were going to be able to withstand the playoff litany of talent that they were going to have to face, some on the road, to get to the Super Bowl. Like, are they legitimate or not? And I still think people are going to question them because of Kirk Cousins, but the way that they are able to get points, drive and get points, and I think they get a lot of criticism because of how many times they have to play comeback throughout the season. But, Chad, there's something to winning games. Last year with Zimmer, they were not doing this. They were losing close games. And in effect, they were basically what Jacksonville has been through the first 3/4 of the season. And now look at them. I mean, NFC North, they've already wrapped it up with 11 wins, but they're also one of those teams it's hard to match up against because they have multiple receiving options. They've got the top receiver in the game in Jefferson, and then they have a dual threat out of the backfield that starts, of course, with Dalvin Cook, who was the number one option last year, and now they go through the pass, not the run, and Cook is able to get what he can in the run game, but they don't have to rely on that. They're able to throw the short passing game, and they allow the receivers to do the rest.
Watching Mike Vrabel's press conference earlier, he was asked a question about leaders in the locker room getting guys to play hard and be ready to go, and he said this isn't a weekly cheerleading contest. So let's keep that in mind about the NFL. It's not a cheerleading contest. That's a pretty good job of cheerleading by Kevin O'Connell in that clip. And from what we heard about the end of the Mike Zimmer era, the exact opposite of the way that locker room felt about their previous head coach. So while they were close in games under Zimmer, that is the difference of a new voice, new direction, new leadership when you see O'Connell talking to his guys as opposed to the end of the Zimmer era where it was good for a little while but really just wore thin as time went on. That's a team playing hard for each other and playing hard for their coach. I really like this group for the Vikings.
Yep. On the flip side, Jeff Saturday had to deliver the message to the Colts locker room after that awful performance it's at the top of cratering jobs that we've seen from other NFL teams in history. Here's Jeff Saturday postgame.
Last two games, you guys have really fallen apart in the fourth quarter. It's like 55-0 scoring there. So the team used to be pretty good at finishing now. What do you think that's kind of fallen?
Again, self-inflicted wounds. Like if you look at it offensively, again, you can't turn the ball over. You can't jump off sides on a short. You can't. Those kinds of mistakes ultimately cost you ball games. Obviously it's a heartbreaking loss, right? You're frustrated, you're disappointed. We'll look back and know that self-inflicted wounds got us again. And those guys, listen, they understand this game and they know. Each of them will look at themselves and say, "What could I have done differently?" No different than every coach in there is going to do, including myself.
There's Jeff Saturday post game. You can tell let's just get to the off season now. There's a vibe of, and it could have been that to begin with, but there was a vibe whenever he was brought in from Irsay and others of we're going to give this guy a legitimate chance. Let's get a look at Jeff Saturday. Chad, I think about what Dan Dockich told us the week that they brought him in as the interim head coach, where he said, I think it's more likely he's the GM than the head coach next year. And at this point, if Saturday wants to be a part of the organization, that's how I view it. It's GM, assistant GM, something more than just head coach, because we've seen too often his team give up big leads, or the clock management issues from the sideline and from the quarterback position, all of it. And, of course, on Saturday, what we saw at halftime compared to what we saw in overtime.
Yeah, and when he took the job, they won the first time out against the Raiders. So you're thinking, okay, there's a new energy, new vibe. Maybe they're going to make something happen. But Jim Irsay pointed to the fact that he doesn't have that fear level of most NFL coaches that have been around. Well, I'll tell you something that'll give you some fear is blowing a 33-0 lead in the NFL as a head coach. So if he didn't have fear before, he's going to have some fear instilled in him moving forward if they decide to give him this job, because no other coach can say they've done that in an NFL game where they've blown a lead like that. So that'll develop some fear. Yeah, I don't think there's any way he's retained as head coach. But I agree with Dan Dockich when there's going to be some role for him. There was already a role for him as a consultant to Jim Irsay and the organization. You know that he's going to do something with them if he wants. May want to go back to media after all of this.
He's really good, and I've enjoyed his pressers. If nothing else, Chad, he is giving Irsay a very honest look at kind of what you're talking about with Florida, with the Gators. Like, who's in, who's not, who should be here, who shouldn't be, and let's have a deep dive on where we want to be versus where we are. And maybe, Irsay trusts him to that level. He certainly does. But does he trust him now based on what we've seen as the interim head coach? It's hard to say that. Only Irsay could shock everyone by naming him the full-time head coach. We don't see that happening. That shouldn't happen. based on the results that we've seen here.
Well, even not just Irsay, from Jeff Saturday's viewpoint, if I'm going through this experience, I am not walking but sprinting back to Bristol, Connecticut and going on that morning show, Get Up with ESPN, and not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
I'd much rather be talking about NFL teams than being thrust into this position of never coached in the NFL, only coached high school. Now you're the head coach of the Colts, and now things are falling apart even more. But I still love the fact that he did win that one game over Josh McDaniels. Can always point to that. For all the NFL coaches that said there's no way he can win a game, no way he's going to do anything, he did win that one game. He'll always have the Raiders game. He'll always have it.
He's really good at talking ball. We'll do the same when we come back. We'll recap the Sunday matchups from Week 15. That's straight ahead on OutKick 360.
Welcome into the Trey Wallace podcast on this somber week as we remember head coach Mike Leach of Mississippi State. Also get into a couple other topics, but I'm Trey Wallace. Happy to be joined by my boy Jake Crane here from Crane and Company. Every single morning you can catch them. Jake, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Trey, man, appreciate you having me. I'm doing well. Obviously, some sad news on the forefront, not only in the college football world, but the sports world in general with the passing of Mike Leach. But it's been a while since me and you've been able to get together. And even though the circumstances are rather grim, I'm always glad to see you.
No, trust me, man. The feelings are mutual. And it's just looking back on yesterday and the last couple of days with Mike Leach and everything that went down, your first thoughts on Sunday when we all start getting news and we all start hearing about everything that's happened with Coach Leach, the first things that come to your mind when that goes down, Jake?
Well, once kind of the shock wears off a little bit to where you kind of get in a normal headspace again and are able to take kind of a 30,000 view look at it. The memories pop up obviously of the funny media moments and the big wins. I mean, you look at the pass to Crabtree in the game versus Texas is an iconic play, and really throughout his career, how integral he was in the air raid, going back all the way with Hal Mumme at Iowa Wesleyan, where they invented it basically and named it. It was kind of his baby, and he was part of that air raid. Spread you out, replace modified runs, replace the run game with the pass game, and pass to run. But the thing I think that I ended up getting the most from the sad news, outside of it not looking good and the shock value wearing off, as I mentioned, was that Coach Leach was something I think that we're losing more of in every day in our society. He was genuinely himself.
Yes,
he had his principles. He had his ideas, and whether you like them or not, he wasn't going to change them. And in a society like we're in today, where everybody goes with the woke mob or what's in or what's not going to get them, in trouble per se, or looked at as a terrible person, it was refreshing almost. So that's what I kept coming back to. That's what we talked about on the show, is just his genuine ability to be himself. And it's sad that that's an anomaly in society today, but it is.
Isn't it crazy to have a coach like Mike Leach who was not afraid to say what was on his mind? It doesn't matter if it was post-game. It doesn't matter if it's a midweek conversation. It doesn't, I went back and watched something last night, Jake, and he was talking about student debt and how he would rather spend a month in jail than have to pay off his student debt, and how it hurts society and it hurts the kids and they can't get out of it and whatnot. But he was not the one to ever hold back on anything. And you couldn't, I don't think the ADs at Tech, at State, at Mississippi State, and I was referring to Washington State, I don't think they wanted to hold him back. He was his own type of man, and I think that's what made him special, brother.
Yeah, no, and that he's an old school football coach at heart too. If you kind of see the way he goes about things, so it's such a unique blend. You could go across the globe, and I don't think find another person that's super similar to Mike Leach and his personality. But yeah, I mean, let me ask you this: if I drove across the country when Joe Moorhead was the head coach at Mississippi State and asked high school football recruits, "Tell me the head coach at Mississippi State," a lot of them are not going to know that it's Joe Moorhead, but those same kids that wouldn't know, if I would have driven through during his tenure, would have known that Mike Leach was at Mississippi State.
You can stream the show live at OutKick.com. And if you're listening right now to this great radio partner, we appreciate you across the OutKick network. OutKick 360 from 6th and Peabody with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. So the Eagles, Chad, they need just one more win to wrap up the number 1 seed, to clinch the number 1 seed in the NFC. But here are the Eagles going into a week where Jalen Hurts has a sprained shoulder. At least that's the initial reports, coming off their win against the Chicago Bears, where he stayed in the game. He still threw that 68-yard touchdown pass to A.J. Brown. They're on the road this week, Christmas Eve afternoon in Dallas, where the Cowboys, we weren't expecting them to lose yesterday to Jacksonville in the fashion they did, especially with the leads that they held. But this has always been circled. And while we're not going to see Dallas win the division, there's still a scenario out there where all 4 teams in the NFC East can get into the playoffs. And quite frankly, this is a Dallas team that can help itself based on where they can rise to a wild card ranking, a seeding, and get a better matchup in the first round to move on. I do think I see Dallas as an NFC championship level team. They've got the run game. They certainly have the playmakers on defense. They have the athleticism on the outside at receiver. They've Schultz and others at tight end. But the Eagles are the team to beat. And that certainly opens things up with the backstretch of the season for Philadelphia, making sure that their guy, their MVP frontrunner, is healthy enough to be ready for week 2 of the postseason. Keep in mind they get the bye if they get the 1 seed, the only team in the NFC that would be able to do so.
Noah Brown had a big game, talking about wide receivers for the Cowboys in this past game. I just don't know. I mean, I think they've got what it takes to make a run here, and they're Super Bowl capable, but they should have lost at home to the Texans.
Yep.
They blow a big lead, and they lose to the Jags on the road. They need to beat a Gardner Minshew-led Eagles team on Christmas Eve before I'm ready to say that they're not in a huge slide right now. I mean, this is 2 straight weeks now of really pitiful performances for them. So if they need to go out and win this game against a backup quarterback, and then I think, they stabilize a bit. But it's one thing in the NFL to have a tough 2 or 3 week stretch. Another thing for that to bleed on and get dangerously close to your postseason stretch.
Yeah.
So the Cowboys need to reverse some of what's been going on the past 2 weeks.
They're the only team that's posted 2 games with 50-plus points, only offense to do that this year, Dallas. They beat the Vikings, 40-3?
They killed them.
They crushed them. Then they had to return home. They had the Giants on Thanksgiving Day. They beat them by 8, I believe. It was a possession game, 28-20. And then they followed that up with performances against the Colts where they crushed the Colts. They put up 54. They scored 33 in the fourth quarter. And then came the Texans and the Jags, where the final score, they win at home against Houston, but 27-23, the final. It came down to the wire. And Jacksonville beats them in overtime. And Jacksonville right now is playing, they're hitting on all cylinders. They've started slow this past week, yesterday, against Dallas. But then you've got Trevor Lawrence, whose stat line right now is, it looks like a guy that should be a franchise-level quarterback and a number 1 overall pick. His last 6 games, 14 touchdowns, 1 interception, 157 for 223 on the attempts. That's a completion percentage of just over 70%. And the Jags are 4-2 in that stretch with wins that have now set them up to where they can win the AFC South all of a sudden. They're only a game behind the Titans, and the Titans were 7-3. They're now 7-7 after the loss to the Chargers. We've seen teams go in opposite directions. I'm not out though on Dallas, and certainly not with Philly. Even with Hurts banged up, I think based on these reports, it's nothing serious that's going to put anything in the playoffs in jeopardy. But this is a division that is outstanding, and we saw it again this past weekend with the matchup with the Giants and the Commanders as well. 3 rushing touchdowns for Hurts. He gets them back in the game and ultimately closes things out in that game against Chicago. But the Eagles need 1 win, and their dual threat guy may not be available to get that one win. But, Chad, they have enough playmakers, and their defense that can get after a Dallas team that if you stop their run, you can get after the passer. This is a Eagles team that we've never seen a defense with 4 pass rushers register double-digit sacks in the same season. Brandon Graham has 8.5. He's next in line to get 10, and when he does, Philly will have achieved that as well. There's a storyline everywhere across this roster.
Yeah, there really is. It's been a remarkable season. Hey, there's breaking news in the NFL. This story came out earlier, but there's a lot more detail to it now. Former Patriots star and current NFL Network analyst Willie McGinnis has been arrested for felony assault. And there is video of this. He beat up a man at an L.A. hotspot, punched the guy in the face repeatedly, and later stood him up with his friends and bashed him in the head with a bottle. And this is all on video. And this is going everywhere right now. This is awful.
And it took place like a week and a half ago or something, I believe.
I'm not seeing the exact timeline. Here's the full, now TMZ has a full article up about it. And I'm sure I can get a timeline on that. It looks really bad. Because he walks right up to a guy who's sitting down. They clearly had words or something happened before.
Yeah.
And he's talking over him and then punches him while he's seated and then picks him up, and him and his buddies proceed to beat him up and then eventually hit him in the face with the bottle. And the dude is standing at the end of it, which is the most remarkable part of all this. He just gets back up and stands up.
Like he's alert?
I mean, I'm going to read straight from the TMZ story, and this properly sums it up, and they describe it well. It starts with Willie McGinnis beat the hell out of a man at an L.A. hotspot, an attack that got him arrested Monday. Shocking video obtained by TMZ Sports shows him punching the guy in the face, later bashing him in the head with a bottle. The wild altercation went down on December 9th.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what day that was, but December 9th at Delilah in West Hollywood. The ex-NFL star and several of his acquaintances could be seen in the footage unloading on a man who was sitting at a table at the Popular Lounge. In the clip, you can see McGinnis walking up to the guy, appearing to exchange words with him, before landing a left hook straight to his face. This is how it starts. The guy is seated. McGinnis is standing over him and punches him in the face. At least 3 other men could be seen in the video immediately jumping into the action, landing a flurry of punches on the man over and over again. The punches never stopped. It was over 30 seconds of punching, despite bystanders' attempts to try to separate the men from each other. At one point during the melee, McGinnis picks up a bottle and then slams it into the man's head repeatedly. The 51-year-old former linebacker can be seen in the footage tossing it onto a nearby sofa before finally walking away from the scene. The man was bloodied and bruised once the brawl stopped. He's yet to be publicly identified. McGinnis was arrested on Monday morning over the incident. Authorities said he was booked at 7:30 a.m. on a charge of assault with a deadly weapon.
And he's an NFL employee working for the NFL Network, so he's subject to the conduct detrimental to the league, believe it or not. And he's been suspended, right, from NFL Network? Did I read that this morning?
I mean, I don't think
that was the first thing that came out.
I don't think he's going to be on Good Morning Football tomorrow or anytime soon. I don't know that it's been formally announced yet, but I doubt he's going to be working on NFL Network. Crazy story. 51 years old, Willie McGinnis.
And also crazy, it took 10 days to get this video going.
TMZ is usually on it quicker than that.
Yeah.
But the story just got out. So it's taken December 9th this happened.
10 days ago.
Yeah, 10 days. But I guess someone just did enough digging to find the arrest report, or he checked himself in, turned himself in this morning.
I guess.
And that's when it was official. And then once that happened, TMZ does what they will do and gets to work on where it happened, and they call and they pay for the security. This security footage. It's just overhead black and white footage of the incident. Of Delilah was the name of the hotspot.
Is that where we went
place.
When we were out there in LA?
What was the name of that place? It did have one word in the name. I don't remember that. Monk,
all of them
maybe?
did. All of them did.
I don't know if it was Delilah. Maybe it was Samson. I think Samson was the name of the club we were at in West Hollywood.
Tonight for the Manning cast.
It was a famous place, though, I remember.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the name.
Wherever Leinart wanted to go.
Yeah.
Manning cast, Monday Night Football, it is Packers-Rams. Whenever the schedule was released, it looked like a great game. No, it's not. But this should be a great broadcast for the Manning cast. They've got George Kittle, DeMarcus Ware, and Ray Lewis, and Lil Wayne is also on the broadcast tonight with the Mannings.
Yeah, I saw
a reason to watch.
Eli tweeted, I really look forward to spending the rest of the afternoon watching Lil Wayne videos to get ready for the show tonight. So they do a good job getting unexpected guests on that Manning cast. Certainly Lil Wayne would be one of them. Lil Wayne, who Hutton and I at a Super Bowl party with Bud Light,
it was worth
once waited until 2:30 a.m. before he took the stage. He was the headliner.
Wasn't he
Outcast
scheduled?
was on before him.
Yeah.
And I think
they ended at like 9.
I'm not even exaggerating. There's like a 4.5 hour wait between the opening act and Lil Wayne, who came on at 2:30.
Outcast ended at 9, and he was the. You're right. I don't know if he had arrived at that point for the Super Bowl.
It was so bold that I couldn't help but respect it at the end of it. I'm thinking
it was still, again, it was worth it. It was worth waiting.
People there to see Lil Wayne were still very excited.
Chad, believe it or not, the Saints still have a playoff chance with the NFC South, with winning the NFC South. So the Bucks lose, and of course the Saints beat the Falcons yesterday, and the Saints were the only team in the division to win on Sunday because the Panthers also fell to the Steelers. So all of a sudden, it's a race where even the Saints can look at the scoreboard, can look at the standing and say, yeah, legitimately, we could find our way into this. So the Panthers fired Matt Rule. They've had the advantage over the Saints because of some tiebreakers. And the Falcons, quite frankly. Yeah, both of them, because of the tiebreakers. If they win their final 3 games, they'll have swept the Buccaneers. They will win the division. So the Panthers control their path to the playoffs. If they finish 3-0, they're going to the postseason ahead of Tampa or any of the other bad teams in the division.
And
the Saints could make the playoffs at 7-10 as long as they beat the Panthers.
I mean, who's the worst playoff team, that winner or the AFC South winner, by the time the playoffs roll around?
Oh, well,
it
depends on the AFC South winner. Jacksonville's far better than these teams.
Yeah. Well, Tampa. I mean, Tampa's the one because of Brady that you would say, all right, maybe. Boy, that's terrible.
Yeah.
What's happening in that division is just awful. And the Panthers blew a golden opportunity.
Yes.
Against the Steelers, having to go with Mitchell Trubisky.
And Trubisky
after
played
Kenny
okay.
Pickett's injury, and he had a startlingly efficient day. Najee Harris finally got something going in the run game for Pittsburgh.
Finally.
They played Steelers football.
Did you play him in fantasy? Don't you have Najee Harris?
I play him every week because I have no
So that's how
backups.
you knew.
Yeah.
So you won. Based on
Deontay Johnson also on my fantasy team. I can tell you he had a big day.
So you mentioned Tampa. They fall to Cincinnati 34-17. They were led 17-0. They allow 34 unanswered. No catches for Mike Evans in the second half. I don't know how that happens. Byron Leftwich, Todd Bowles, Tom Brady. I don't know how you're not going to Mike Evans in crucial moments throughout the second half after building a 17-0 lead. That's part of the problem. They also, they turned it over 4 times and gave the football back to Joe Burrow and company. And you do that, Burrow's going to take advantage.
I saw that and I thought, is he hurt? With the Mike Evans stat. And he wasn't. It's strange.
Bruce Arians, get involved, man. This offense needs your touch.
We need to do something where we just, starting with Nathaniel Hackett and on down, we rank the one-and-done candidates in terms of most likely to be one-and-done and least likely. Todd Bowles is climbing that list. He may soon replace Nathaniel Hackett as number 1 on that list of one-and-done. Lovie Smith is on that list.
Oh, you're saying like most likely to leave?
Most likely to be fired after 1 season.
I still think it's Hackett number 1.
I said starting with Hackett going down.
I don't think you can pass him.
But Todd Bowles is climbing that list and getting closer to Hackett.
Yes, and this is the reason why Arians stepped away, so that Todd Bowles could be set up to take over this roster and win. Take over a team that's won a Super Bowl, and that was a comeback away, a big play away from beating the Rams, and instead they've gone in the opposite direction. This is also...
It's a 3-person list, by the way.
And then in
Bowles,
Houston.
Lovie Smith, Nathaniel Hackett. I would have put Josh McDaniels on there, but they've won a few times lately, and the report came out that the Raiders don't have enough money to fire him with the buyout and everything else involved. So
did you see what they're paying Frank Reich in Indy?
$36 million.
Yeah, $9 million a season.
That's bad. And how about Frank Reich sending the text to Kirk Cousins after the game, after the comeback against his Colts team, and congratulated him and talked about how ever since he had that comeback win for the Bills, he's had a great opportunity to share his faith with people, and he knows how religious Kirk Cousins is. This is going to be an opportunity for him to talk about this game for years to come.
Yeah, so $36 million. They'll pay that through 2026. And there's a story up with ESPN. NFL, the NFL's discussing this. They've spent $800 million combined on fired coaches and executives over the last 5 years on buyout money.
It's a good gig.
So we don't hear much about this buyout money. We hear it all the time in college.
Yeah.
But the ESPN saying that over the last 5 seasons, they've spent $800 million roughly on fired coaches and execs.
I'd like to see the breakdown of exec versus coaches and what the ratio is between both. I mean, I know coaches lead the way with buyout money.
Yeah, but those contracts are going to be far better.
I mean, how much
normally
do staffs get in buyout money when you fire a coach? How much is the offensive coordinator getting if he's under contract for another year? I mean, that's where it really breaks down to you're going to have a lot of money involved when it comes to the stats. But I don't know because you hear about that because in college it's always the addendum of this is what it'll cost to fire this coach with 4 years left on this big contract and their staff. Plus their staff's going to cost this much to fire. You don't hear about that as much in the NFL.
A couple of stats from Week 15 that stood out to me, Chad, and just going through the Jags and the Cowboys, which we've talked about. The Raiders and McDaniels win on that crazy play at the end by the Patriots, which is going to be replayed forever. The Giants snapped an 11-game losing streak in primetime. That blew my mind, that they had lost that many games in primetime with their win over Washington. And honestly, it was a bad call, a very controversial call that allowed the Giants to win this game. Vikings, Jags, and Raiders, they all won. If you combine all the points that they trailed by this weekend, they trailed by 187 points. Vikings, Jags, Bengals. And according to ESPN Stats and Info, it's the first week in NFL history where 3 teams trailed by at least 17 points, but all 3 came back to win. It was a great weekend for the NFL.
It's one for the ages. I mean, it's the best weekend of this season for sure, but it's one of the best individual Saturday, Sunday, late season that I can ever remember. Starting with that first game was a great omen for the rest of the weekend with that big comeback by the Vikings.
Justin Herbert, the first player in NFL history to throw for 4,000 yards, at least 4,000 in each of his first 3 seasons. Get that guy a run game, man. They throw way too much. Throwing like 50 times a game.
He made 2 throws in the Titans game that I'm putting on a list of him, Mahomes, and Allen are the only 3 that could make the throw in the league that I'd even put close on the list. There was one rolling left where he threw a rocket close to the sideline and one rolling right, the one that won the game, that put them in field goal range in the last play of the game, second to last play. That was remarkable. I mean, running on a sprint to the sideline and lofts it 40-plus yards down the field and drops it in Mike Williams' lap where only he could get it, right on the sideline.
But the frustrating part with that is they're putting up 14 points in that game until that moment.
Yeah.
You know? That's what's frustrating about the Chargers is they're not balanced enough. And look, they also haven't been healthy enough because they've missed their premier playmakers at receiver for a good chunk of the season. But Vrabel was admitting this. You saw a situation as well where the Chargers are taking timeouts as the Titans were about to score. Chargers are taking timeouts to save time instead of running it down, thinking that they could stop Tennessee, that they were going to tie the game. So at worst, you're thinking, okay, they're going to tie the game. We're watching this together yesterday, Chad, and I say, Vrabel's going to go for 2. If they score, they're going to go for 2, which is reminiscent of our trip to London a few years back.
Yep.
But why he couldn't do that is there was, 42 seconds
48
left?
at that point, because they got the ball back, and their first snap was 44 seconds left.
So it took that element out, Staley, by taking some timeouts in that moment, took the element of going for 2 out for Vrabel, because if you go for 2, you're up by 1 if you get it, yes. But he also admitted, like, you can't end the game there, because he knew the game wouldn't have been ended by going for 2, because Justin Herbert was going to get the football back against a very banged up and tired defense. And Herbert did exactly that. Drove down, got in a field goal range. Field goal still beat them even if they went for 2. That's why they tied it and tried to just play for overtime.
Well, the best case scenario on the play where Tannehill scores in the sneak is that they get stuffed on that play. It goes to 4th down.
Yeah.
They can run it down to, they score with 8 seconds left on 4th down. Then
they go for 2.
You go for 2 and the game's over at that point. But you can't get cute on 3rd down. You don't want to, we're going to take a knee now and then try to score on 4th to win it. You would rightfully get crushed if you didn't get it on 4th down at that point.
Chad, the Lions do it again, and they do it in crunch time, in the clutch.
Our Lions.
Late 4th quarter drive against New York to win that game. Getting a great play call and play design if you haven't seen how they set this up. And Jared Goff continues to show why he's probably the quarterback in Detroit next year. Never would have signed up for that at the beginning of the season at all. And now he's leading the way, and you've got a Coach of the Year candidate in Dan Campbell, and the Lions, who are scratching and clawing their way to the NFL postseason right now.
Robert Saleh, terrible clock management.
Yes.
Calls the first time out. They had 2 left with 19 seconds left on the final. Let 22 seconds tick off at 1.18 on another play.
It was like Jeff Saturday.
It was really, really bad. And who's done a really good job with the Jets for the most part.
Yep.
Terrible finish to the game for him. Zach Wilson was okay in this game. Yeah. Not terrible. But that 4th and inches play call with Goff to the tight end for the touchdown, that is a gutsy play too. On a 4th and inches where I'm expecting quarterback sneak, get the first down, they run a play action where it looks like they're going to power run, sneak the tight end to the opposite side of the formation, ends up being a long touchdown pass to take the late lead.
Right now, the Lions remain in the 9 seed. They're 7-7, and they trail the Seahawks for the last team out. But the Commanders right now, with their loss to the Giants, they're in the 7 spot at where they're benefited by the tie, 7-6-1, 4th in the NFC East. Right now, all 4 teams in that division are in. That may not play out that way because the Lions continue to come up with these clutch performances, and they continue to win. And they're putting up points. That's the other thing. You got to keep up with them.
It's fun team to watch, too, the way they've been playing lately. And if they can go from 1-6 the playoffs, and the Commanders were in a similar spot, this year, where
1-4.
The 2 teams that are battling it out,
1-5 after the
two
Titans
of
game,
the teams battling it out for the end of the NFC playoff chase, both looked like they were completely dead earlier this season.
A team that's dead, New England, based on the reaction in a final play of regulation, 24-all. Bill Belichick's team reacted as though they didn't know the score. Or if they did, they went rogue and acted like, you know what, we're just going to try to do something to end the game instead of just play for overtime because this play didn't work on what was a draw. They're out of Hail Mary range, so just going to go with a draw, and it ends with the Raiders taking it into the end zone. We give thoughts on what this signals with the Patriots organization because we're not seeing this. Typically don't see a team that doesn't look like they didn't know the situation. They didn't know what the coach wanted executed. But both players involved in this have admitted, yeah, we did it on our own. What does that mean? Long-term, short-term, however we want to look at this. Ultimately what it means is they're not making the postseason because of this terrible loss. But beyond that, this is an eyebrow raiser for me. We'll get Chad's reaction as well. We'll chime in on that, plus the other great finishes to wrap up what was a fantastic weekend of football. That's next on OutKick 360.
Yeah, I think because things, transitioned from that regime side to that fundamentalist side. So we also had to change some of our tactics and our procedures and everything else and how we did things to cope with these guys because they were coming up with some ingenious ways of doing things along the line as well with some of the IEDs, some of the, the booby trapping the houses, things like that, using the cell phones to call to detonate everything. So it became, I think, as much as you say more violent in that way, because with the regime guys too, we knew that there was the end state was trying to get Saddam, so that we needed intel as well. We needed to gather that intelligence. There was only so much that was there from previous, just historical data. Then we had them actually make it real intel and workable intel. But with the fundamentalists, if you gave them a chance to vote, and we'd say vote based off, okay, does this guy want to is he going to go along with the capture, or is he wanting to fight? And then let's see who wins. They would rather fight than do anything. There was, so many times guys would detonate suicide vests because it's like, well, they're not going to take me, clack themselves off, thinking they're killing, other folks around them. But they just, I don't know, they just were different folks, and it was like we had to get more violent in a way, because again, we were going after intel and doing things, and our procedures and everything on the battlefield just had to kind of adjust, just like they were doing.
That's crazy. I truly cannot imagine. And I was in college. I started college in 2010. So I was in high school when things were getting kind of real bad in the 06, 07 era. And I remember people would always talk about do we really need to be fighting these guys? Are they really that bad? And I'm like, this Zarqawi guy's literally chopping people's heads off, right? And don't think it stops there. Like, if this guy could, he'd chop all of our heads off too. Fortunately, they dropped a couple bombs on him, I believe, if I recall correctly. So now I want to get into some comparing and contrasting. What were the big differences between fighting in Iraq versus fighting in Afghanistan? Was it mostly the terrain? Was it the level of the combatant? Like, what were the big takeaways that were different from each other?
I think early on with Afghanistan was, everything was so spread out. Everything was so far in between, and we didn't have many helo assets early in the war, just because of how, basically really having to share them along with the other task force and things like that. And so there was a lot more driving, or you would get flown to an area and then you'd be there for a bit, and then, oh, you're not getting there, you're not getting back to your home base for a while. So you're trying to make do of it, and literally just sometimes sitting around doing nothing. But then within Iraq, you had more cities, bigger cities, everything else that we were hitting. Granted, you had Kandahar, you had Kabul, but everything really wasn't happening in those locations. It was farther out because, where the terrorists had their training camps from, years before us ever getting there. But then within Iraq, they could hide right there in the cities. There were, so much, just open roads, everything around. And everything else, at a lot more built up areas, and it was an easier road system to get around. So it made it easier for them as well to move around. The terrain, definitely changed throughout. Iraq, you had your river valleys in a way, and you had the humidity, you had palm groves, everything else, and then you had your rocky mountain areas, dry areas. But then Afghanistan was just so severe with the mountains. I mean, that that's some treacherous terrain in itself.
So, welcome back to OutKick 360. Chad, I have seen more reaction to the Raiders' finish of the Patriots. It's been opposite of what I expected. The questions have been more about why Mac Jones was unable to throw the Hail Mary than it was why the players reacted the way they did in the moment. Take a knee. You take a knee and you just go to overtime. I don't get it. They went with the draw because they couldn't go with the Hail Mary, and then Ramondre Stevenson and Jacoby Myers go lateral, throwing back to Mac Jones. It's picked off by Chandler Jones, taken away by Chandler Jones, returned 48 yards for a touchdown. I don't understand how any player goes rogue like that, but especially with Bill Belichick.
So years from
what
now,
happened to the Patriot way?
Years from now, I firmly believe that in some podcast, in some far-flung NFL universe somewhere, one or both these guys will go on a podcast at some point and tell us that they heard from some coach to either do this or heard that they were behind. I just don't believe that not one but two players would go rogue in this situation. Now, Mac Jones seemed to be on the page of what are you doing when the ball was thrown to him, right? I mean, he got laid out by Chandler Jones and he ran it back. But I'm watching this over and over. Mac Jones looks like, what are you doing? When he throws it to him, almost hands out like, what's going on? When they throw it and then Chandler Jones picks it off. But Jacoby Myers and Ramondre Stevenson both blew it on this one. If you're Jacoby Myers and you catch that lateral, how are you not just either running forward or falling down when you're surprised that the ball's in your lap? If you know that it's just a draw play. So did he just panic and do the exact same? It does not make sense that two guys would go rogue. If it was just Stevenson or just Myers, okay, they thought they were behind, they did something stupid, but both of them? I don't buy it.
But it also doesn't make sense.
I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I think they heard from someone to do this.
But it wouldn't.
And they're covering for their coaches.
But for what reason?
The Patriot way. I'll take the blame. I did it. I'm not going to put it on someone else. I'm the one who went out there and did it, so it's my fault.
Well, the Patriot way would be you have to ask Coach why we called that play. You know, he
Coach
can tell
said it was a draw play.
Yeah,
and it was not executed properly.
They ran the draw play because they couldn't throw it that far.
And look, maybe these guys do a podcast, after their career, and they just say, "No, I screwed it up. I saw red, and I tried to pitch it back, and then the other guy did the same thing." But I can't buy it because it's two different guys.
But
if it was one player, I could buy this rationale.
But Belichick also didn't throw the guys under the bus. He just said that we made mistakes on the final play. He didn't go as far to say that the guys went rogue, to your point. But the players went the opposite. They went all the way in by saying that, we made a mistake. We didn't execute that well.
I don't buy it. I think they heard something. They misheard it. Someone said the wrong thing. But for both those guys to do it, I don't buy that just two guys went rogue on that final play.
Well, Mac Jones.
We may never know the truth.
Mac Jones didn't act like he was getting the football again.
No.
Nor did he need to.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Mac Jones was on the page of draw. Those guys heard something different.
Back at it tomorrow with more headlines and sports analysis on OutKick 360 across the OutKick network.